the link. So
Okay.
we are live now.
Okay. Welcome to the Rockport Select Board meeting of November 29th, 2020. Just brief remarks before we start the meeting. Although we had hoped to have this meeting in person tonight, especially for the discussion of short-term rental, we decided over the weekend to change it to a Zoom session. The most recent executive order by the governor further reduced our ability to have participants in the Opera House, or the numbers, in the Opera House. And so we're able actually to accommodate more people on the Zoom call than we would be able to do in person in the Opera House. Additionally, and importantly, obviously, we want to make sure that everybody stays safe, and we certainly don't want the town of Rockport to be in a situation of being a super spreader of the COVID virus. So hence our Zoom technology tonight. So please bear with us, everyone, and we'll try to make this work. So the meeting is called to order. The select board is here, as well as numerous residents, guests, and welcome. The first item on the agenda is the town manager's report. And Bill, have you done the muting that we talked about? And so you're ready? Or can the board now mute themselves?
Give me 1 second.
And we asked, as we get into the short-term rental, we'll have more discussion about how this is all going to work, but I'll save that till we get to that point on the agenda.
You should be okay to the board members to mute yourselves and unmute at this point, hopefully.
Let me try.
No. Okay. Well, I'll give you my report, and then I'll continue to play with that. How's that sound?
Okay.
At this point, though, I would say if the board members just want to be on unmute, then that should be okay. I mean, I realize you have dogs and stuff in the background, but
yeah, but if we have questions about your town manager's report, we can't.
Right. That's why I say keep unmuted.
Oh, unmuted. Okay.
Yeah.
Jeff needs to, you need to unmute Jeff.
All right, he just did. Thank you, Bill.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so I don't have a lot to add to the written report that I submitted last week because I was away out of the office the end of last week. So LG Whitcomb Landscaping finished the Walker Park seawall reconstruction on Friday, October 30th, which was basically, it took them 1 week to undertake that project and finish it for the most part. It's about 99% complete. They still have to put the handrail in for the new granite steps that go down to the little rocky beach area. I did include some pictures in the written report that people can see on the website if they so choose. So the park is back open and able to be used at this point. The town's, an update on the town's SHAPE program. So SHAPE stands for Safety and Health Award for Public Employers. That was set to expire on August 2021. It's a generally a two-year award that we have. But due to the COVID-19, the Maine Department of Labor can't conduct any in-house inspections, and so they offered extensions for another year if we supplied them with our 2018 and 19 OSHA reports, as well as making sure all departments had low incident rates, and the departments completed an achievement action plan to show we have continuous improvement plan in place for the SHAPE program and the safety program. So all of the documentation was submitted and accepted by the Maine DOL, and our SHAPE status was extended for another year until August 2022. Which certainly is a beneficial project for our employee safeties. As a member, I'm a member of the International City Management Association, which is ICMA for short, and a member of the executive board of the Maine Town, City, and County Management Association. Because of that, the MTCMA board has an appointment to make to the ICMA Northeast Regional Vice President Nominating Committee. And I was selected a week and a half ago to serve as Maine's representative on that ICMA Regional Vice President Nominating Committee. Because of COVID, there's not a lot of time associated with this. Fortunately, it's all going to be by Zoom. So there'll be, starting in January, maybe a meeting a month for 2 or 3 months for us to undertake that process. The Keep Maine Healthy Grant. So Governor Mills recently extended the Keep Maine Healthy Grant through December 11th that the town had received approximately $73,000 in funding. That was expected to expire, previously on October 31st. At this point, what it means for us is that we have until December 11th to spend any of the grant funds that we were unable to spend before October 31st. We're still hopeful that there may be some additional funding that's supplied through that grant program. Depends on what other towns have done, if they've spent all of their funding through the grant or not, or whether they're turning money back in. So if there is additional funding that we get, then we can certainly use that for other activities.
Bill, how much of the grant money is still left to be spent?
We don't have a lot left to spend. Some miscellaneous items that we didn't purchase, some additional signage, things like that. Maybe some additional dispensers that we can purchase for hand sanitizer and the like, or replace ones that were destroyed at one of the parks, things like that. But we don't have a huge amount of money left to spend.
Yeah. Did we buy a fair number of masks? Not, but just the paper ones, the disposable ones? We
do have a fair number of masks that were purchased, yes, and those will be located at the public buildings, and they are now. But we also would purchase some for potentially locating them at parks, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to put them at the parks now because the parks are pretty much, seeing a much reduced gathering spaces at this point. But we can also put them out in the spring if we're still in this situation, which we probably will be.
Mm-hmm.
So. Update on the library. So the temporary library on Commercial Street, we're completely moved out of that building and has been turned back to the owner and also accepted by the owner, which is important to note. The new tenant actually helped us quite a bit. We had a large number of shelving units that we weren't going to be taking with us and would be surplus, and had agreed for another library to take some of those. The issue was that if we remove them from the walls, then it would leave large marks in the walls, large holes where they were attached to the walls. The new tenant that moved in wanted to keep the shelving units in place and took sole responsibility for any of the damage that was caused to the walls by installing those shelves. So we basically have walked away from the building, we fulfilled our commitment, and we're good to go, which is definitely a good thing. The new library, obviously the work continues on the library. This past last Thursday and Friday, we had road work being done as the road was being shut down at the intersection with pavement being removed in preparation for additional road work there, including installing some more curbing and some drainage. It's expected that this Thursday, Friday will be the contractor will having pavement placed at the intersection. So that we can have that happen, and then the storefront that was.
Okay, I'm gonna go. I'm going into the meeting.
Sorry about that. The storefront that was delaying some of the work on the lower level is moving forward and progressing, so that's a good thing. That's happening sooner than we expected, which is good. The landscaping has started as well by Rhino and is moving forward. They've planted the trees on the stream side. We had to buy some additional ones, the ones that were put in place or described, specified by the landscape architect, really were very small. They were less than 4 feet tall. And so I authorized purchasing an additional four cedar trees to be put on that edge. I think it was four or five. And these trees were 7 or 8 feet tall, which acted as a much better buffer. So those are in place, and we'll probably still have to put some more in next spring, I would think, as we continue to finalize that project. everybody is working well on the project. And I continue to thank all the contractors and the subcontractors and Phi for the services that they're doing there, and Rhino as well for being very flexible with the landscaping. And again, you get to a final 2-3 weeks of this project, and there's a lot of stuff that's happening and needs to be wrapped up, but it's continuing to go along fairly well. Any questions from the board?
Hey, Bill, it's Michelle. Just a quick question, and along with your Keep Maine Healthy grant, with the increases in the area of COVID, are we starting to have any contingency discussions about what we're doing with the town, or, you know, office hours or any of that? I mean, I'm sure it's in the plan, but I just wonder if other towns are starting to do that too, and if we're having those conversations.
I'm starting to have those conversations with other managers in the area as to what we're looking at. It'll probably be something similar to what we did in the spring, where we, maybe we go to appointment only or something along those lines. We'll kind of have to wait and see. I mean, today we got fairly better, not better news. I mean, just not as bad a news as we've been getting over the last several days. So it's kind of a wait and see at this point, but we have those plans in place from what we've done previously that we'll be able to act fairly quickly, whether it's splitting shifts, whether it's reducing hours, whether it's appointment only or something along those lines.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, thanks, Bill. The next item on the agenda is public input on non-agenda items. So obviously short-term rental is on the agenda, so that's in a few minutes, not long. And so are there any public comments on any other topic? Not seeing anything. You don't see anything? Nothing on the live stream, Bill?
Yeah.
No, I don't see anything.
Okay. Board, I don't see the board indicating anything. Okay. All right, so amendments to the agenda. Does the board have any suggested amendments to the agenda? Seeing nothing. All right, next item on the agenda is approval of meeting minutes. So we have 3 sets of meeting minutes. We didn't put them on a consent agenda. So let's just step through each set of minutes for approval or amendment. So we start with the meeting minutes of May 26, 2020.
I move
Go ahead, Denise.
we approve the meeting minutes from May 26, 2020.
I'll second.
Okay, is there any comment from the board? All right, so roll call, Jeff,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Denise,
Yes.
Michelle.
I cannot vote for those. I was not in attendance at that meeting.
Oh, right, good point. So Michelle abstains.
I abstain.
And I vote in favor. Okay, the second set of minutes, October 13th, 2020.
I move the board approve the October 13th, 2020 meeting minutes as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, roll call. Mark,
Yes.
Jeff.
I need to abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
Ah, sorry. Okay. Denise,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
and I vote yes. All right, and last, the October 27th, 2020 minutes.
I move the board approve the October 27th, 2020 meeting minutes as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, roll call. Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Denise,
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
I vote yes as well. All right, that was nice and quick. All right. The next item on the agenda is to act on a committee application. We've received an application from David Cantor to be on the investment committee. And there's David. And is he unmuted, Bill?
He
I
is.
am now, I think.
Great. And thank you, David. Hi.
You're welcome. Hi.
And thank you for submitting an application. It's customary for us to ask you if you'd like to say a few words.
Um, I will try to keep it to a very few words, but I've been an investment advisor professionally with two different firms, actually simultaneously, starting in 1998. This is the first year I am a full-time Rockport resident, which I'm very excited about. And I am very pleased to have the opportunity to contribute to something of the hard work that goes into running this town and making it a place that we all love.
Thank you, David, and thank you for submitting an application and for obviously we're very pleased to have somebody with your background. Does the board have any questions? Okay.
Well, welcome. I mean, it's
Yes.
great to have
Yes.
newcomers into town. I know you've been a seasonal resident for a while, but nice to have
I have.
newcomers, new residents step forward and get involved like this.
Not much good has come out of COVID, I'd have to say, but making us full-time residents of Rockport is a silver lining.
That's great. Okay, a motion?
I'll move the board appoint David Cantor to the investment committee with a term ending June 2023.
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion by the board? Or anyone else? Okay, roll call. Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Denise,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
and I enthusiastically vote yes. All right, thank you, David. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda, and I see that Abby is here with us somewhere in my mass of photos here on the screen.
June is with us.
Sorry?
Well, I just see her room, I don't see Abby.
Oh, okay. So we have an action item to act on the harbor fee schedule. Would you like to introduce this, Bill?
Sure. So Abby can certainly speak to this, but essentially the fee schedule is pretty much the same as it was. My setup is a little bit more difficult here in my office than it is at the Opera House, but essentially the same as it was last year, with just one exception that Abby can certainly talk to. She presented this and discussed this with the Harbor Committee, and they approved it as it is. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Abby, and she can talk about the difference, the one difference in the.
Okay.
Great.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Yeah, I just, in the interest of COVID and everything else going on, I figured it would be in the best interest of everybody to leave the harbor fees the same for this year. And also in looking and comparing to our neighbors to the north and our neighbors to the south, and that we sort of still are fitting right in between. A little cheaper than Camden, a little higher than Rockland, and myself and the Harbor Committee agree that that's the place we want to be. I don't know what's going on with my light. And so, but one of the things that's always kind of gotten me is in the shoulder seasons, so meaning May through to about July 1st, and then in September and October, we get a lot of folks coming and using our launch ramp, which is great, wonderful. And then they come along and we have 300 feet of dock space, which again, a lot of harbors do not have that. And we're very lucky to have that. And they proceed to launch. They pay their launch fee, or they pay somebody who pays the commercial launch fee, and they come over and they sit on the dock. And we have an hour for free on the dock. And we've always kind of said that anything longer than an hour, we charge, $10 an hour, or it's just sort of been this not structured fee schedule. And I don't feel comfortable taking that without it being a part of the fee schedule. I also think we can, just to capture something and not making it too draconian, easy to swallow, a $5 an hour over that hour for anybody who wants to stay any longer. So we're getting something for what we're putting into our infrastructure for the boats that live in Camden, that come to Rockport twice a year to launch and then to de-rig. We're capturing something. So I feel like we can, it'll be more work on our end, but that's okay. We'll have more interaction with folks which would be nice. So that's my proposal. It's not going to be an easy transition, especially for local folks, maybe. But I'm happy to hear what you all think of it. So with that, you guys have any comments?
Thanks, Abby. Comments?
Yeah, Abby, my only comment on that is I know for the other fees, we have Rockport resident fees that are reduced. So are we saying would this $5 an hour also be for Rockport residents or just residents outside of Rockport? I just wasn't clear on that.
So I posed that to the Harbor Committee and they felt that it should be across the board. But again, that's a board decision if you all feel like we do in fact do that with some things. We have a reduced rate for Rockport residents and mooring holders when space allows on the dock. They pay $1 a foot as opposed to the $2.50 that we charge. So and then where else? When we winter boat storage, Rockport residents have precedent over that because it's land. We can offer a different rate there.
Michelle, I'm on the harbor. I'm the liaison to the Harbor Committee, and the across the board fee is quite minimal as it currently stands in this proposal. It's going to be hard enough to manage and regulate to this as it is now, because if you think of the logistics of how Abby and her team are going to have to do this, they're going to have to log the time somebody ties up to a dock, start the stopwatch, and after the first hour, go up to somebody and say, you owe me $5. And after the second hour, go up and say, you owe me another $5. And that's in and of itself is going to be difficult. There are an awful lot of boats, either Camden, Rockland, or many other places that use our town facilities for a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours, either ahead of getting pulled in the fall or in the springtime when they rig, and to the point where many are staying overnight on the dock, and Abby has to then chase down those fees as well to the next morning. So this, I think, is straightforward. $5 an hour, anything after the first hour when you're doing your rigging and unrigging.
Yeah, I think it makes sense because a lot of these people are having, Johansson or other companies who are doing all the work. And, the $5, I mean, it almost seems like a nuisance level of a fee. But I guess maybe you got to start somewhere.
It's sort of how I feel, Denise, that you have to start somewhere. We do have our launch fee is basically, it's on the honor system. There's a box there, and we get a couple $100 in there every other week or something. So people are putting money in that box. So this, I plan on having some very clear signage stating, so it will be. We will do our best to try to capture everybody that stays, more than an hour and a half. But we're really hoping that people sort of will understand the luxury that they get for sitting on the dock for as long as they get and happily pay the $5. Yeah. But we'll see how that goes.
Well, and if nothing else, it'll keep, part of it is we don't want people staying long on the dock, especially not paying because.
Well, that's right. And then and hopefully that will keep the wheels moving. And, and if it's very clearly marked and clearly, a signage that says after the hour, it'll be $5 an hour, please see Harbor Master, or something along those lines, tasteful looking. I think that will help. And it's a jumping off point. We'll see how it goes. Doesn't have to be set in stone, and we can see how it goes after a year. That's sort of my proposal.
Do we have a sense of whether people are discouraged from, if you come into the harbor and you haven't planned ahead and made a reservation overnight on the dock, and you go over to the dock and you see it's full with all the 1 hour people or 2 or 3 hour people, do we have a sense of, whether people will call anyway and try to figure out if they can get on there for the night, or, because that's where the real money is the overnight dockage, right?
Right. Just as a boater myself, I know I would call ahead and see that if I felt like, very rarely are we completely and totally full where someone can't either wait 15 minutes, stop in the unloading zone, get out, talk to somebody. But I do plan on having better signage with a phone number, somebody to call if they happened to see that the docks happened to be full at that point. But we are really going to try to keep enforcing our 15-minute loading and unloading zone as well. So hopefully people can come in, and like you said, that's really where the money is, which brings me to another point too, that before we finish on that, the one other change about the length of stay.
Go ahead.
I want to
Go ahead, Abby, if you want to. I don't see other questions propping up. You want to go ahead with your other point?
Oh,
For you.
me or
Abby.
me?
Yeah, Abby.
Okay,
did you
sorry,
say-
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So one of the things that came up in the Harbor Committee meeting was length of stay on the dock. So in the past, I have allowed some bigger boats and then some not so bigger boats to stay longer than, say, a week's time. And I've found that to be a bit of a nuisance, but also a point that cannot be missed is that it's a revenue maker for the town. So it does sort of take away from what the docks are essentially for and making sure people can come in and go out. But I have some revenue numbers to make, so I've made the decision. Is that okay? I've made that decision to allow longer stays. And for instance, we had one 70-footer on the A float, which is the new float out in front of my office. And they stayed for probably 2 weeks. They were on and off the dock during the day, which was nice. But they had like a 2-week, pretty much 2-3 week stay. And that net probably $7,000. So that was a good chunk of the summer overnight dockage. So I'm always trying to increase revenue there. The point that the Harbor Committee makes, which I totally understand, but I explained where I was coming from, is that to discourage that length of stay, because that's essentially almost like leasing a spot or something, which really isn't what the docks are for. So I do understand their point too. So the proposal is to limit from June to I think it's July 4th, 4th of July to Labor Day, to limit that stay to be 7 days, which is doable. And doesn't, like I said, it doesn't happen all the time with these lengthy stays. And then on the shoulder seasons, I could put someone on the dock for a little bit longer. But I just had to, it can't go without being said that may impact revenue numbers, because I have done that in the past.
And Abby, it does say Memorial Day to Labor Day in the proposal.
Okay, Memorial Day to Labor Day.
But that's an interesting point, because
We tossed it around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on this one, the reasoning for reducing it to 7 days is appreciated. The awareness for all of us at the town level is that it could impact overall revenue for the summer.
Correct.
It may or it may not. I mean, it's
Right, it may not.
There aren't that many people that stay more than 7 days on that dock.
Right, and some of the big jumps I've had in overnight dockage are those, but I'm very careful when I project the revenue not to over project that, because it's nothing I can, unless someone makes a reservation and says we want to stay for 3 weeks, and I know what that's gonna
Well,
be.
after 1 week, Abby, I'm with you. I mean, it turns from being a reservation on a dock with a short-term stay to being a slip.
Yeah, I agree.
That's not what the intent of town docks are.
Although it's a slip at a premium price. I'm not disagreeing with what the Harbor Committee is recommending, because this is in your purview, but they're paying a day rate for a long-term lease, essentially.
Right.
Okay, any other questions or comments? I'd like to make a motion.
I move the board approve the 2021 Marine Park Harbor fee schedule as presented.
I'll second.
Any further comment or discussion? Okay, roll call. Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Denise,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
And I vote yes. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a discussion of the draft, and I cannot say that, put enough emphasis on that, draft short-term rental ordinance. We will be discussing this draft for the first time. The public and the board saw it for the first time when it was distributed, what, Wednesday last week, Bill?
Yeah.
And Denise and I will provide an overview of the first draft. I'll start out with that, but I want Denise to add anything that I might have forgotten or inadvertently misstated. The way we're going to handle this, first off, is that, let me just say this in case you had signed on to the meeting late. We had hoped to have this meeting in public. We really felt that we shouldn't do that given the surge in or upswing in coronavirus. We actually are able to accommodate more people via Zoom than we can in the Opera House with the new reduced numbers by the governor's executive order. So hence the reason this got changed just yesterday to a Zoom meeting. So please bear with us on this. The way we're going to handle this is, I guess all of you who are on the call now had pre-registered, so to speak, with the town to be able to say something publicly. And, you know, this, let me just make sure that you know that this is not going to be your only opportunity to do this. This is the front end of this process. There's going to be more drafts. There's going to be more discussion. There's going to be other bodies looking at this. I think at some of the prior meetings that we had, some of the complaints that we received, understandably, because we were just trying to have sort of conceptual workshops. Some of the complaints were about the fact that there is no draft, and they need, you needed to have something to look at, to sort of shoot at or whatever to focus on, and that's what this draft is now. But it's the first of what I'm sure will be numerous, iterations of it. So to the extent that you want to make any comments publicly, we're going to have to limit public comment to 3 minutes per person. Bill will let you know when you have reached or are approaching the end of your comments. And he will take you off of mute for that period of time for those 3 minutes. Obviously, he's not going to mute you in the mid-sentence, but please observe the 3 minutes so that other people are able to get their comments in as well. When you're on, we will try to have the board be unmuted during this period so that we can ask questions to clarify your comments or your concerns and so forth. But first, we're going to start with just a brief overview of, as I said, by Denise and I, of what we were trying to accomplish in this first draft. And then we will have discussion among the board, as we always do. And then I will open it up to the public comment, which will be those individual 3-minute segments, as I just mentioned. Okay?
All right, so Deb, just so I'm clear on the process, you're going to cover the highlights and then do a full overview of the draft of the ordinance first. We'll be able to have comment amongst the board during that overview, and then lastly, open it up to public comment with limitations of 3 minutes per person.
That's correct.
Perfect.
And I was not going to step through the ordinance, provision by provision. I was going to do an overview of sort of the overarching kind of policy approaches here. And then to the extent the board wants to get involved in, any of the detailed sections, then we can do that. Okay. All right, so we had, Denise and I had several discussions in preparing this draft. We weighed the comments that were made by various select board members at meetings over the past year. Also knowing, Michelle, in your case, that we have a new select board member who hasn't had the opportunity to participate in those meetings yet. We weighed the comments that we'd received from members of the public. Members of the public who are concerned about the existence of short-term rentals and impacts that they have on their neighborhoods, but also comments that we received from members of the public who currently have short-term rentals. On the one hand, we know from comments on those who have concerns about short-term rentals that neighborhoods, some feel that neighborhoods are experiencing a loss of community. They don't want to see the sort of proliferation of more short-term rentals and what they consider to be absent owners. There are some complaints with respect to short-term rentals that have caused parking issues, noise, and other complaints for certain members or certain residents. On the other hand, we've taken into account that some people have made improvements to their property in anticipation of having the short-term rental income. Some people are only able to hold on to, for example, inherited family properties, relying on that short-term income that is short-term rental income that's generated. We also know that other people feel that they've upgraded the quality of their neighborhoods by making improvements to properties that they're then able to rent on a short-term rental basis. And we know that it helps people to buy homes here, second homes here, where they're not ready yet to be able to be full-time residents in Rockport, but their intent is to make improvements to those homes and perhaps be able to be full-time residents here at some point. There are other macro concerns that we have to, as select board people, keep in mind. We understand that some people feel, they bought into neighborhoods that are now being used for a commercial activity. On the other hand, we have people who feel that the government shouldn't have any right to tell them what to do with their property, which, it's certainly goes to the heart, it's a very heartfelt concern. We also know that there's an issue of level playing field, that commercial entities have to abide by certain rules and ordinances, while perhaps competitors don't have to. So we feel that all of these, I know that Denise and I, and certainly the board, I'm sure, feels that all of these are very legitimate and important points. We take them seriously. We took them seriously in coming up with this first draft, and obviously the board will continue to take those seriously. We tried to come up with something that we thought was going to be somewhat of a compromise. The danger in compromises is that nobody is ever happy, completely happy with any sort of compromise. And I'm sure that's probably going to be the case here too. But nonetheless, I wanted to describe to you a few of the things that we did that we felt were in that sort of compromise mode. First off, the board has previously discussed that owner-occupied short-term rentals, and let's just call them STRs for purposes of the discussion, are not generally perceived as being the problem. The draft permits the owner-occupied short-term rentals in all districts. There's no difference between them being in a downtown district versus any other district. They have to register annually, and they have to provide off-street parking for their guests. And for those owner-occupied STRs that happen to be in a subdivision that does not allow commercial activity, those would not be able to be registered. So as long as you don't fall in the no parking or the covenants and restrictions category, and you register, there really is, no intended impact on owner-occupied short-term rentals. And again, this reflects the fact that we have not been getting complaints about owner-occupied short-term rentals. With respect to the non-owner-occupied short-term rentals, which is really the focus of all of our discussions thus far, Some residents have asked that they be completely banned. In fact, the first resident comment that I got after we circulated this, within the first day or so, we got a request from a resident that they be completely banned in the downtown districts. And believe me, there are people who want that. This draft does not do that. If the property, again, let me go back to my notes here. Some board, I don't know where the board members are going to come out. I don't know where I'm going to come out on any of these things, but we have certainly not tried to ban them. And in fact, we have provided for all non-owner occupied short-term rentals to be permitted depending on what type of district they're in. So for example, if your short-term rental is in one of the more dense districts, like the 901 Harbor Village District, or the 904 residential districts, or the 913 Rockport Downtown District, then they're considered to be a conditional use. And the important thing to remember with all of those is that as long as parking and those subdivision restriction requirements are met, the draft would grandfather in all of those existing short-term rentals. So again, that is the most important thing for you to hear me say tonight, is this draft contemplates, and I mean, I don't know what comes out of the board and what comes out of the voters when it goes to the voters, but this draft contemplates the grandfathering in of existing short-term rentals, except if the parking or the neighborhood covenant restrictions are not met. Jeff, question.
Yeah, one quick question. When you talk about grandfathered, my assumption is, and I understand that your current concept on, or the current concept on grandfathering, but if the building is not designed for occupancy by people or other safety features are not met, that does not imply that you're still grandfathered.
That's right. And that's a very good clarification. You can't be, renting out a barn to somebody that otherwise wouldn't meet the occupancy requirements of the town for any kind of occupancy and be grandfathered in. The town can't do that. So, and so those are, so we tried to distinguish between the more densely populated areas where short-term rentals can be concerns to the neighbor, are more likely to be of concern to some neighbors, and those where they're not. And so the attempt to do that was to say new ones are conditional uses in those three districts that I mentioned. Existing ones, except for the exceptions I mentioned, are grandfathered in. And then for those areas that are outside of the more densely populated districts, the non-owner occupied short-term rentals would be permitted uses. Again, they have to meet parking requirements. They have to, not violate covenants of subdivisions. They have to be, as Jeff said, properties that can be fit, or that are fit for human habitation, et cetera. But aside from that, those are permitted uses. And again, the existing ones are grandfathered in with those caveats that I've mentioned. In the event that somebody comes to, there's a moratorium. The draft also provides for a 2-year moratorium on future additional short-term rentals. The purpose of the moratorium is simply for Rockport to be able to, once all STRs have their registration, we know what we have, what we don't have, then this 2-year moratorium really gives the town the ability to take a look and see if we really have an overabundance in any particular area, or just take stock of what we have, which we don't have the ability to do right now. Then with respect to new non-owner occupied STRs, again, not the owner occupied, just the non-owner occupied, after that 2-year moratorium, if somebody comes in, wants to start a new, wants to register a new STR, then they would have to go before the code enforcement officer. We've provided some standards for the code enforcement officer to apply. And then if they're not happy with the code enforcement officer's decision, then like any other decision, it can be appealed to the planning board. The purpose of this was to provide the ability for future STRs for neighbors to be able to come in and say, wait a minute, there's too many in my neighborhood. You know, every other house on my street is an STR. Or for neighbors on the other hand, perhaps on Warrenton Street, for example, to say, hey, we have a lot of STRs here. We like having the STRs, so please approve these STRs. I think it's a very, I think that what we realize is that it's a very neighborhood driven sort of analysis. And we wanted the people who live in those neighborhoods to be able to have that input, or at least that's what's suggested in the draft. Again, that applies to just those areas that are conditional uses, not to the permitted use areas, which are outside of the dense districts. Is that what you're going to ask, Denise?
That's what I was going to clarify, is between the difference between the conditional use districts and the permitted districts.
Right. Thanks. The draft contains a suggested limit on the number of STRs. And again, I cannot emphasize enough that this is just a draft. It's just something for people to comment on, to shoot at, to give us better suggestions if you have them. The idea was to say, okay, we don't want investors coming in, buying up houses in neighborhoods and, and renting those out as STRs. So if you're a non-resident, as the draft stands right now, if you're a non-resident, then you can have one STR. Because, for example, if this is my second home, or if this is my inherited home, all those examples that, that I mentioned early on, then this gives that non-Rockport resident the ability to have that STR, or to register the STR, to be grandfathered in, as I mentioned before. If, on the other hand, you have it provides that for Rockport residents, there's a limit on 3 STRs. We don't know if 3 is the right number. We just put it in for a placeholder. Maybe it's a terrible number. Maybe there's all kinds of reasons to have a different number. So, speak up and let us know. But the idea was that Rockport residents who, want to engage in this income, sure, great. But what we really wanted to do was to try to encourage situations where we as a town and municipal officials have an interest in making sure that we have a long-term rental market here. We know that we have a very tight or almost non-existent long-term rental market. And we need that long-term rental market for people who provide services to us, for people who teach, perhaps for visiting nurses, whatever it is. We need to have a more robust long-term rental market. If all of your rental market stock is short-term rental, then obviously, where you can get more money, then obviously that makes it difficult to have a long-term rental market. So what we would like to do, some of you on this call have invested in the long-term rental market and have long-term rentals. What we would like to do is to try to say, hey, there are incentives we'd like to give you if you invest in long-term rentals. So we tried to do that in this draft just through a ratio, saying that you're not limited to 3 short-term rentals. If you're a Rockport resident or a non-Rockport resident, you're not limited to 3 short-term rentals or 1 short-term rental. If in fact you have long-term rentals, there's a ratio there that gets applied to open that up. if there are other ways to incentivize long-term rentals, we're all ears, but that was just one suggestion. I would say, just in closing of my comments, and then I would ask Denise to lob in anything that she thinks is important before we go into the board discussion. I would say that this draft is remarkable for things that it doesn't do. And that is, we don't try to overburden owner-occupied short-term rentals, STRs, in any way. It does not seek to ban non-owner occupied STRs in any district. And instead, we're grandfathering in, we suggest that we grandfather in the existing ones so that, for all the reasons that I mentioned. It also doesn't impose an upper limit on how many nights during the course of the year you can rent the short-term rental. Some towns in Maine and elsewhere do impose those kinds of upper limits, but this one does not. I should say also that the limit on the number of short-term rentals, the distinction between residents and non-residents, all of those things were taken from some of the other short-term rental ordinances around Maine. So that wasn't just some idea that we came up with. It's something that's been used elsewhere. So Denise,
I think you really covered it all, Deborah. I think it's not that long a draft, and I think that's credit to Bob Hall, who did the drafting. It'd be a lot easier to just ban all short-term rentals, as many of our, other tourist towns have done, as many of our residents have pointed out to us how easy it could be for us to just ban them. It doesn't not do anything, which of course some other residents would like us to do. So I think it's in the legal world, when I practiced drafting regulations, I would call this a straw man proposal. It's one, as Deborah said, rather than talking in the abstract about what if, how do we do this, here's something we can get reactions to and get a much better sense of where voters in this town want to go with the short-term rental potential regulation.
So board comment first, Jeff.
Yep. First of all, just a reminder for everybody, this does not impact rentals over 30 days. And this ordinance has absolutely nothing to do with your longer term rentals. So people that rent apartments, homes, and whatever else it might be to those folks that are here for longer than 30 days, such as per diem nurses and other service providers, this does not impact them at all. The addition of the neighborhood covenants is a good addition, because there are several neighborhoods in Rockport that have covenants that prevent business activity, and it would be up to the town, as you noted earlier, during the permitting process to identify those and not issue the licenses to those that have covenants, unless those that are applying for it can go after all the people in the neighborhood, as any covenant pretty much allows you to do, and seek a exception through all your neighbors. And that's a process in and of itself. The recognition that short-term rentals are in fact a active business was recognized in this draft, and that is in fact, at least my view of it, short-term rentals are a business. The registration fees don't appear to be and we've only drafted one registration fee, the $50 per residence. That does not appear to be overburdensome. And I saw in the draft, we haven't identified the non-resident fee. The health and safety requirements were all identified in here and are all applicable through the code enforcement officer and the current land use regulation and other activities that we have. So that's good. The couple minor things I saw in the draft. One, I think we need to clear up the grandfathering portion, because people will read into that what they want to read into it in terms of grandfathering. I think we just need to be rock solid clear on what that does mean. Secondly, transfer registrations, I think might need to be cleared up a little bit, but this does not pass from generation to generation, and nor does it pass from one owner to the other without going through the registration process in town. I did see one item that might be a little bit overburdensome, and this is the minor stuff, but requiring that trash be removed 24 hours after the person leaves, I think might be a bit tough. People usually schedule their trash pickup for a 1 week rotation. That's on page 6 under General Rules 1.12b. But otherwise than that, I think as proposed, it's balanced between the extremes we've heard from one viewpoint and the extremes we've heard from the other. And I don't see it as being overburdensome to anybody. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Other board member? Mark.
Yeah, just a couple of things on clarification. One of my questions is, I noticed you said 3 minutes for each person. I can ask you a question, but it might take 15 seconds. Is that 3 minutes including the response? Can that 3 minutes be broken up in segments? Or can the person ask 3 different questions at 3 different times during the meeting, so that, you know, they might have a question about something that comes up during the meeting that hasn't already been talked about or potentially could be talked about?
So Mark, I think that we're gonna ask that only one person speak once, because otherwise we're gonna be here all night, and I don't think any of us want to be here all night. The thing is, again, this is going to be, but that's a good clarification questions. This is going to be discussed many times. This is just the first, as you know, it's the first on this draft. As you know, we've had numerous discussions previously, and anybody, if they feel that they couldn't get all their comments in 3 minutes, they can submit them in writing via email to Bill Post. You know, just to assure everybody, we read everything we receive, and so, you know, we read the stuff. It's just as impactful to the board as saying something orally. As opposed to the question and answer, do the answers eat up your 3 minutes? I don't know. We just need to be reasonable here, but the idea is 3 minutes per person.
Number 2 on the list, and the list is short. Have we received any concerns or comments from hotel owners, businesses, people like On the Water that actually service short-term rentals? And I know Jeff had mentioned about the woodworking and the main media, people that rely on these things, that they may do them more than the 3 times a year. Have we gotten any concerns from any of those people about what we're doing and how it may affect them?
We haven't gotten much response to this since we just circulated on Wednesday or Thursday. Anyway.
Well, I mean, I think we talked about it before in one of our other meetings where, you know, I think I had mentioned On the Water as one of the particular ones, in our motels and hotels. I mean, has there been any concern like there has with the residents, pro or con, with regards to what we're moving ahead with?
I think that we've had On the Water, for example, has given us some comments in the past that have been, you know, pro short-term rental and, you know, not particularly enamored with regulation, but I don't recall, you know, anything else in that regard that's responsive to your question. I think it's important that we've grandfathered in, you know, we're trying to grandfather in existing short-term rentals. So we're not trying to ban short-term rentals. So I would think that those are all positive things, you know, that people would try to pay attention to.
The only reason I say that is because I was picturing somebody like the Samoset. I don't want to pick on Connie, but would these short-term rentals impact their business by them being here? That's what I'm saying, is have we received anything from any business saying it would impact our business by these people having these short-term rental businesses?
And I think I mean, part of what happens there is you get into what the level playing field is. If they're set, if hotels and motels are required to meet one set of obligations, and then essentially a competitor, and I understand we've heard from many residents and short-term rental folks who say, but it's a totally different experience to stay at a short-term rental.
True, but, and my comment was, have we received any pro or con from any businesses that rent rooms? Seven Mountain Motel, Glen Cove Motel, Country Inn, you know, have any of those supplied us with any information, pro or con?
I don't know, Mark. You'd have to go to the Rockport website like everybody else and look under the left side margin that says short-term rental, and all of the written comments and verbal comments that we received, in addition to the October 27th minutes, are all there for everyone to see. Whether or not individuals on the select board have had individual comments with some business owners, I would imagine that some of us have.
Well, have we received any as a town? That's what I'm saying.
Well, I'm saying if we have, then they should be on the Rockport website.
Well, somebody, either you or Bill, ought to know whether we've received some.
Well, I don't know, Mark, I don't know anything more than you, as we're all quick to point out. I'm only 20% of the board, okay? So I get the same thing you get, but Bill has his hand up. So Bill?
Yeah, I don't remember seeing any, Mark, from any of the businesses like the Samoset or any of the various inns or motels. Doesn't mean we won't get any, but I don't remember.
No, that's true, but I'm just trying to get that question asked, because, and I've only got one more, and then my other one that I'm going to omit would be more difficult and create a little angst. So I do think it's a great meeting. I think, I'm looking forward to our guest comments. And Bill, you might give us a heads up as to how many live streaming we have and how many are currently signed up here. But I would also ask that we consider not having any future workshops or meetings until we can meet in person. And I am now done. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll comment. I think we've got 26 participants that are here, I think, to talk on this subject. And then there's 17 that are watching the live stream.
Yeah.
And this is Michelle. And as you mentioned, Deb, I'm the newest one into this conversation on the board. And, I think for a number of reasons, I have concerns, and I'm very much looking forward to our STR owners and our residents talking about those. I know we keep talking about, we've had complaints. My understanding is we don't really have any documented complaints other than people saying that they don't like STR. So I'm interested if that's true, if there are documented complaints, police, calls to dispatch, what have you. I have a number of just, questions or I guess comments on the ordinance. I can put those in writing, but, we talk a lot about code enforcement officer registrations. Are we going to be able to support that? I mean, we're going to have to talk about an increase in staff if we're going to be, registering and doing reviews of short-term rentals. And there are some things in here when we're asking for people for gross income and things like that. So I'll put them in writing, but I really, am really interested in knowing, the types of complaints that we've gotten. And maybe it's because I haven't been close to it until now. But, certainly just interested in more about that. And then to Jeff's earlier comments, just some of the general rules, we talk about fire pits and, leash laws and things like that. I think we just need to be consistent with what are our requirements now. Do we require a permit for a fire pit, and what are the requirements from a setback perspective? A leash law in Maine. I just think we need to, if we're going to put rules in place, we just need to make sure we're consistent with what some of our ordinance and requirements are now.
Thanks, Michelle. We do have a leash law, and it applies to everyone. I think, though, that some of those provisions simply came out of this board made a determination that they wanted to follow. What was it, the Freeport ordinance? I think. And so I think those probably came out of the Freeport ordinance. And so, you know, whether or not we need to reiterate our leash law here or not, I mean, I don't think that anybody is, that's a big, you know, that's a big issue, but I think that it's because the board made that determination early on to
Gotcha.
follow the format and the general, you know, sort of parameters of that, I should say format. That's probably why some of those things found their way in. And in terms of documented complaints, there are documented complaints in the sense that people have we have received letters, many letters from people who have problems with short-term rentals, and those are on the website. Those are in the testimony or the statements that have been given at the various workshops. We have letters that have been sent to the town that we've made public. As I said, the first letter that I received after this was circulated was one who said we haven't gone far enough. So, and I'm sure that that letter will be made public too. So anyway, they are out there, and you know, just focusing on police complaints, that's a very small number, and there are reasons why we've said that people don't do that. So anyway, in any event, but
well, and really on the subject of police complaints, they're just not categorized that way.
Right.
If you get a call about too loud a party, it never gets in a category of, oh, this is a short-term rental that had too loud a party.
Right.
It's just too loud.
Right. That's what we found. And in fact, I have over the years, I can assure you that I have over the years called the police for a short-term rental that's next to me. And yet that police complaint does not show up as a police complaint, as a short-term rental police complaint. But I have been, you know, people have parked in my driveway on numerous occasions where I cannot get out or a fire truck can't get in. So there are complaints, very legitimate ones.
I guess what I would say, Deborah, is when we had our police chief before us, he said he searched the website that they use for logging complaints. He used 3 or 4 different avenues to achieve the same goal and didn't have any. So I guess there have been none logged. And I think, you know,
wait a minute, Mark, stop right there though, because what came out in our meeting is that they're not categorized by the type of facility. The police don't know whether it's a short-term rental, or they don't include that in the police report. So our police chief recognized at the time that the information is not categorized by short-term rental. So it's not surprising we don't see complaints for short-term rentals. We see all sorts.
So my question to that then would be for Bill, seeing as how our first meeting was in September of 19, could we have the police chief check from then until now to see if we have? Because I'm assuming they would have been more carefully documented, knowing it is such an issue with us right now.
Yeah, I certainly can have him check.
Yeah, Mark, I doubt that they designate them by short-term rental any more now than they did before. Please, let's set some parameters here, or we are going to be here all night. What I guess I failed to say in my comments up front, and intended to say, was I'm asking that people please focus on this draft. This is not a workshop on whether or not we like short-term rentals or we don't. There have been 2 workshops on that. There's going to be more opportunity for that. People can write us letters until the cows come home about that. But the purpose of the agenda tonight is to focus on this draft and the concerns about this draft. So if everybody, including the board, please make their comments based on that. That's why we have an agenda. All right, so with that, Bill, would you like to proceed?
Yeah, well, what I thought to make this a little bit easier, hopefully, and so that we don't miss anyone, I thought maybe I would go through those that are on the screen and just say their name and then see if they want to make a comment. And then that way it's orderly and we don't miss anybody, if that makes sense.
Great.
Okay. So first one that I have on my screen after the board is Tim Montague.
Thank you. Yes, I just looked at this the other day. I'm a non-owner occupied, and I use a professional management company to manage the thing, to make sure everything's taken care of. And I was just curious why there's a distinction. I pay taxes. Why is there a distinction between the two if I have an active manager doing this? So I don't get the difference.
The difference, as we have heard from people who have submitted statements through our various workshops, is that when you have an owner, and this is not an unusual distinction to make. In fact, it's really made in all the ordinances that I've ever seen, is that you either have an owner that is that's in residence, that makes sure that people aren't parking in the wrong places, that nobody's doing any kind of nuisance, etc., or you don't. The other part of it is, in a lot of the people who have expressed concerns with short-term rentals, is that they have said that as long as the owner is living there, the nature of their neighborhood is not really changing. They still have a neighbor, they still have somebody they know, they still have somebody that they could depend on but the fact that they may have somebody staying in a guest house on their property doesn't change the nature of the neighborhood. So there are a whole host of reasons like that I think that typically a distinction is made.
Even though I'm here quite a bit, there are gaps where I do offer it for rental. So it seems like you're splitting hairs there a little bit. That's my view.
Yeah, no, it's a fair comment.
That's all I have at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Up next in this, I'm going, just to be clear, in the view on my screen, just so that everybody's aware. I'm looking at my screen and the view that I have. So up next I have Jamie Weymouth.
Hi guys, I just, interested in the whole thing since I own a property at 25 Main. Also do a lot of long-term rentals in Camden area and Rockport area. I was concerned with the aspect of the setbacks of fire pits and things like that. So we start defining what can be on, you have a 15-foot setback on the side property lines. Like, when do we start defining you can't have a hot tub, you can't have this, you can't have a shed? Like, let's not, there's a setbacks for a reason, and those are structures, and we can't start defining what we pick as a structure and what we can't pick as a structure, because then it becomes, you guys just become complete police of property, what people can have for property. So
it's a good comment, Jamie. And as I said, I don't think there was any, I think that provision made its way in, a couple of those provisions, because they were in the Freeport one, I think.
Yeah, and I think other people tend to congregate later around fire pits, so that's probably what happens. But yeah, I just think you can't start telling people certain things. There's setbacks for a reason, and structures. Yeah. So don't start defining what can be put in on setback.
Yeah.
And everything else, I think the parking ordinance is good. But I also grandfathering people in. I think people that are investing in the community and want to come in the community should have the right to rent their properties. That's all I really have to say.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Good comments.
Up next, I have Melissa McCool.
I defer at this point. I'd like to come in later.
Okay.
I'd like to hear more discussion before I make any comments. Thank you.
Now I have Doc and Hanani Wallace.
Well, first of all, Pearl and McCool didn't get anything in there. Let me say at the outset, this whole thing is a sham. This is 3 board members on the Rockport Board of Selectmen that are driving this through. And folks, we're going to get this. This is going to be on June, no matter what they say, we're done. I also want to say that Truth in Advertising, we're in the sainted condition. We live on our property. We're 2-family zone. We have not much to lose on this. But I am really unalterably opposed to this legislation. It is a violation of property rights. I want to say that there's one of the things that has driven this is this nutty village vibe concept that basically all the good citizens of Rockport have created this wonderful village and everything else, and that now the renters, the people like us that are renting, are selling. That's the quote, selling this vibe to these outsiders. And I can just say, I hope that the Greeks and the Italians and the French and the Brits never take that appropriation, because we would be opposed to the raison d'etre of tourism. Secondly, this whole thing is a solution looking for a problem. And I heard one of the writers of this draft, what a joke. It's not a draft, it's going in, folks, that the fix is in. Yeah, the fix is in. There's been a zero police report, and everybody can comment on that one, but the police have said there's zero for 2 years. There's been 2 hearings, 2, one in person and one by this limited Zoom thing. The overwhelming comments have been against STR regulations, even though I know there have been board members that have begged members of the community to comment in support of regulations. That's wrong. There's been an interesting exchange between Mark Kelly and Deborah Hall that I saw on the most recent live stream. And basically, Mark Kelly said, well, we need to have a draft up ahead of time. And the response from the board chair Hall was, well, would you like to draft it? Well, you know what? This whole thing raises an ipso facto concept that there needs to be regulations. Why should Mark Kelly be required to write regulations if there's no reason to have them?
You have about a minute.
Ordinances. I know that Deborah Hall has said, comment on the ordinances. Yeah, there's a huge emphasis on business. Yeah, there is. It's a business to try and pay your damn Rockport taxes on property taxes, and they're going out of control. This board should really be attending to that action. Thirdly, the Board of Selectmen.
Doc, your 3 minutes is up.
Oh, of course.
Feel free to submit more comments as you do.
You can talk for 15 or 20 minutes, and I can't respond for 3.
Because it's customary for us to have to limit when we've got 28 people who want to speak.
It's too bad you were limited.
Well,
yeah, you can talk forever. We can't talk.
All right, Doc, I am not, I'm not going to.
No, you're not going to argue with me because you will lose the argument.
Would you go to the next person, Bill?
Sure. So next, I believe it's Sharon Perlman.
Hello. First, I'd like to congratulate Michelle on being elected and congratulate Mark on his re-election. Next, I'd like to say I did submit about 8 questions today. I'm not going to go through all of them right now. I have some other questions. The first is, how did you decide who would write the draft of this ordinance?
The way we decided who would draft it, first off, Denise and Bob and I are 3 lawyers with a lot of experience in drafting laws and regulations. That's what we've done for a living. This board, we went to this board on numerous occasions. We have discussed conceptual policy as to what to put in a draft. When it went to the ORC, it was very clear that every detail about this has policy implications. So the best way to do it was to put something in writing, which people were asking for a draft. We did that. Bob Hall is on the ORC. He has been drafting the most recent ordinances for the ORC, and he did the first draft for Denise and I to then take a look at, and that's how it was drafted.
Okay, leading to, how was Bob Hall, who I believe is your husband, Deborah?
That's correct. That's correct.
The one chosen of all the ordinance members?
Because he is a lawyer with expertise in drafting laws and regulations, and the solar farm ordinance and some of the most recent ORC regulations. He has been the drafter. Then they go to the ORC, and lately we've determined that this is the best way to approach things. You draft something, the ORC then reviews it. It's difficult for anybody who has drafted laws. It is impossible to draft by committee. Somebody has to put the first words on paper.
And I guess I just want to interject, because I know there's some suspicion that by being drafters, then we're sort of driving the agenda.
You are, though. I do believe, well, I believe that's the case, yes.
I understand that, but I would love to hear, I mean, specific concerns, how you draft it, what you'd like it to say instead. Because we really, there's no pride of authorship in this drafting. It's a straw man ready to present to our community.
Right. I'm just going to interrupt you because I have a few minutes to speak.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Aisha, I don't want to take up more time.
What I'd like to say is I'd like to circle back to the fact that I think both Michelle and Mark have raised some really good questions that should not be dismissed. And I believe, Deborah, you're fairly dismissive in some of your answers, particularly that I've seen tonight with Mark. And I do have a problem with that. I think both Michelle and Mark raised some really good points and questions that should be, and I would respectfully request, be followed up on, because I think many of other people who are listening and are concerned about this would like to have those answers as well. The last thing I'd like to say is that I respectfully request there need to be more meetings so more people can weigh in. We have about 1.5% of the population on tonight's call via Zoom or live stream. I believe there are others who might like to participate. And we have, in fact, only had 2 meetings, one live, as was pointed out, and one Zoom. And I feel like, what is the hurry with this? I feel like you're trying to railroad and push this through. And I wonder how much of it is personally driven by some of the board members versus professionally motivated. Thank you.
Okay, let me reiterate that there are going to be numerous meetings on this. There are going to be numerous drafts. We've had 2 workshops so far. This is another meeting. There will be meetings before the ORC who will get this. There will be meetings before other committees perhaps that will get this. This is the very first part of that process.
Okay, next we have James. I don't have a last name, but James.
Hey, my name is James Watt. I'm with Camden Accommodations, and I make a living at short-term rentals and winter rentals as well. I also manage properties for owner-occupied homes as well. I have 5 full-time employees. I employ 20 cleaners, landscapers, plumbers, electricians, roofers, everyone across the board. At one property, I probably had 8 contractors there doing work. And this has been a very hard year. And we were already had guidelines to follow with this pandemic. And I think we did a great job. I think the town did a great job. Everybody was respectful, and it could have been a lot worse, but it turned out being pretty good. If there are certain regulations set, it will hurt my business. I have 3 children that I have to pay to go to school, all under the age of 5. Okay. I have employees with families here. This is their profession, and it will hurt them. Now, Camden they have a regulation. You can't have a short-term rental under 1 week. There's a lot of pushback for that, but I think in my business, it made it a little bit easier for everybody to comprehend. It was easier turnovers. It was easier to be regulated. So maybe for the next meeting, we could bring in some professionals that do this 24/7. We can work with the town for a draft that is good for everyone. I don't agree with everything in that draft, but it's going to happen.
James, I missed what you just said before. about the draft?
Yeah, so I'm more than happy to help build a certain draft. I'm sure On the Water would love to help as well, especially the professionals. But then again, it's like it's like making a restriction on cutting your grass. If you say you can only cut your grass on Fridays, you're going to have a lot of pushback either way. So maybe we can
30
set
seconds,
another
James.
meeting with the professionals to do this as a living.
That's a good suggestion, James. And, and I appreciate it. This draft does call for 7-day rentals, like Camden does.
Yep.
And it also I just have a question for you. Because we have grandfathered in existing short-term rentals, how would this negatively affect your business, do you think?
It would neglect future business. I get calls from people that have inherited properties that can't keep that property unless they rent it out. And really long-term rentals don't work out for them either because of the property taxes. They have to pay a certain amount a year. And what's the point of even keeping it if you can't pay for it?
Yeah, we understand that, which is why we grandfathered in the existing ones.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the problem is you can't just have absolutely unlimited number of short-term rentals if you want to respond to the other part of the population that doesn't want to have unlimited short-term rentals. So what we tried to do here was to strike balance, and maybe the balance isn't there yet, James, and this is why we're having these comments. If we want comments, but that's what we tried to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Thank you for your comments. So.
Thanks.
Okay, Bill, next.
Yep, so we have Victor and Marcia Steinglass. Yep, there you go.
You got us?
Yes.
Don't start the clock yet. Okay, first of all, I haven't really been convinced that there really is a need for regulating short-term rentals. We lived in this community for a long time, and short-term rentals have certainly been part of this town for the last 47 years that I've lived here. And the whole concept that there's a difference if the person living in this 2-bedroom house is the owner or a guest or somebody renting for a month or somebody renting for a week. Anybody walking down the street looking at that property cannot tell the difference whether that's a short-term rental or whether that's a long-term rental or an occupied by the owner. You will have problems with people who rent, who don't behave responsibly. You will have just as many problems with neighbors who are owners who don't act responsibly, and you're in a worse position with the owner because they're going to stay there forever, as opposed to a short term. You live with it for a week, they're gone. So you can have exactly the same types of problems with the owner or a renter or a short-term renter. It's just a matter of people getting along together, and if there's a problem, we talk to our neighbors, or we talk to the owner of the property, or you talk to the people that are renting. You do it nicely, and that's not a problem. If they don't go on, then you have police and places that you can go to complain about that. It doesn't mean that all short-term renters are horrible. It's this whole concept of us versus them bless you.
Sorry.
It's okay. The problem of us versus them, they are not tourists. Tourists have always been a dirty word. This whole community has lived economically on tourism, whether we like it or not, whether it be directly on tourism or indirectly through businesses such as restaurants and retail and services.
You're about 30 seconds.
Pardon?
30 seconds, Victor.
Nah, I missed all of it then. Forget it.
No, you still got 30 seconds. That's fine.
Well, Marcia has.
I should get 3 minutes because I'm a separate person.
Go ahead,
So-
Marcia. Go ahead.
That's
Okay.
Marcia.
Okay, I'm Marcia. Okay.
Don't look so annoyed.
Yeah. You
Who?
know,
You.
I'm not annoyed, you guys. I'm just sitting here listening patiently.
do you know more than 7,800 confirmed cases in Maine and probable cases since March in our state? 7,800 people. Currently, there are 48 hospitalized, 13 in critical condition, and 7 on ventilators in the state of Maine. Knox County has 141 cases, 71 recovers, 8 hospitalizations. The reason I'm telling you this and bringing it up is that you and the board act like everything is hunky-dory. Do you know that we've come off a very, very unsuccessful summer season for all our people? We're coming into a winter where COVID is starting again. And you're sitting here trying to stop the ways that we do, the ways that we can utilize to cope with the financial effects of all of the things that are going on in the state of Maine. And if I hadn't been brought up as a polite person, I would say shame on you. Shame on you for not paying attention to all the pressures that the people in this town are dealing with and acting like someone who says, Denise, people were concerned about strangers walking the streets. Why don't you try to help the people who live here instead of trying to set laws that stop us from trying to make do with what we have? And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Bill, how much did we cut out of the budget because of COVID?
Oh, it was 250,000, something like that.
So because of COVID, we sharpened our pencils and cut that amount of money out of the budget in order to help our residents. We deferred taxes. We have done a whole lot of things in order to help our residents in this COVID environment. Bill, next.
Yep, up next we have Felicia.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing us this opportunity on the Zoom call. I sat myself down today to read through the proposed draft, and I have the following points that I would like to bring up. I take exception to the one statement in there, inequity in the manner in which businesses are treated and regulated. And so to that, I have the following responses. In response to section 2 of the proposed first draft, please refer to the following verbiage contained in the document regarding rules relating to lodging establishments. In response to section 3 of the proposed first draft regarding commercial use, in response to section 3, article 2 regarding inspections of property, in response to section 3, article 3, singling out change of land use ordinance in zones 901, 904, and 913, and permitted use in other districts regarding non-owner occupied STRs. In response to the proposed changes to section 919 of the land use ordinance regarding the following statements: the testimony or statements of neighbors in support of or against further STRs, and the impact of more STRs on the availability of long-term rentals in Rockport. Verbiage contained in the proposed first draft registration section regarding inequity in the manner in which businesses are treated and regulated, hotel motel lodging versus single unit STRs. Presently, hotels are not required to adhere to the following proposed policies for STRs, or please provide proof that going forward, commercial lodging establishments will be required to adhere to the proposed policies. Number one, number of registrations and or rooms to rent based upon the number of long-term rentals that the hotels offer for lease. The proposal is to base multiple registrations on properties that the requester is offering for residential long-term lease. Number two, will hotels now be required to adhere to specific length of stay designations and to rent for only a minimum of 7-day stays?
You have about 30 seconds.
Will hotels now be required to ensure that all garbage is removed within 24 hours? Will hotels be required to inform renters about leash laws? Will hotels be required to report the number and duration of their rentals and their gross annual income? Presently, this is not a requirement. Commercial hotels are not required to adhere to additional permits based on the numbers of rooms they rent. I'll also be sending these into you in writing. One important other point that I wanted to make and is the fact that according to Article 10-144, the Department of Human Services, Bureau of Health and Division of Health Engineering, Chapter 206, Rules Relating to Lodging Establishments, Section 2501, in the exceptions area, private homes shall not be deemed or considered lodging places and subject to a license where not more than 3 rooms are let. And also, I have heard people mention that $50 for a registration fee is considered to be acceptable, while hotels that are multi-unit, let's say, 22, 24, 50, 100 rooms, their permit fee a year is $175. They do not have to adhere to any of these other policies that are written in this proposed first draft ordinance. Yet we're talking about inequality in the manner in which businesses are treated and regulated. So if the hotels are not required to do it, why are we requiring short-term rentals to do it? So that's basically what I have based my review upon, is this statement about equity between businesses versus short-term rentals. And if we are going to make a platform on that in an ordinance, then hotels also need to follow the proposals and policies as set forth by whatever you are proposing in your ordinance. Now, I would like to go on record as saying, and I appreciate the time, that any ordinance, because I feel that this is a violation of property rights. And I will be submitting all of this in writing to you so that you can respond to my questions one by one at that time, because I realize that I pose a lot of questions to you at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Felicia. Next, Bill.
Yep, up next is Claire Tully.
Hi, thank you. We have a 2-unit house at 31 Main Street. We offer an apartment on Airbnb in the summer, and in the off season, we rent it to young people. I just want to start off by thanking the board for working to come up with a compromise, and also for allowing more time for comment. I think that's really important. And I must say that I am with Marcia on the issue of the pandemic. I really hope you will be tabling this issue entirely till after the pandemic. It really seems very insensitive to bring it up at this time, where so many people are struggling. So I hope you will reconsider that. At the very least, I would also urge you to fact check before relying on comments that might not be true. For example, some of you have said that investors and corporations from away are buying up properties strictly to operate them as STRs. And, I've talked to some realtors about this, and they don't seem to think this is the case. So I think it's really important to give specific examples. And I also do not believe, as others have mentioned on this call, that comments have all been documented in writing and provided. And I think that we deserve to know what those comments are so we can figure out if there really is a problem, because frankly, a lot of us are skeptical that there is one. So please, if we could get that information, that would be good. This proposal is going to impact the property rights of all Rockport homeowners. And so, you know, it's really important to do so. Look, I'll likely get grandfathered for my Airbnb, but this ordinance will make it very hard for other residents who currently do short-term rentals or need to do them in the future. And this includes my kids. I want to leave my house to them. And but my grandfathered status will end when I die, and my kids aren't going to be able to afford, like me, you know, to keep the house if they can't generate some income. So that's concerning.
You have about 45 seconds, Claire.
45 seconds? Okay, I want to say on the owner occupied housing, most housing is just one unit. Most of us don't have another unit. This is going to turn most Rockport residents into owner occupied, non-owner occupied, which will subject.
Claire, could you repeat that? Could you, I don't want to miss it. Could you repeat that last statement?
Okay, well, if I can slow down.
That's
Yeah.
okay, we'll give you extra time because
Well, I
have
would
to repeat
appreciate
it.
that. I would appreciate that, and I will try to be really quick. But so most Rockport residents have single family homes. Those of us who have a, you know, extra unit are really in a minority. And very few people rent out rooms in their houses because, you know, we don't want to cohabitate with guests. They don't want to cohabitate with us. And that was before COVID. There really isn't a market for rooms. So most Rockport residents that, you know, even if they're here in the community, they're going to end up being non-owner occupied, because most people leave their houses in the summer in order to rent them out, and they live in a camp or they live with other family members. So you're turning a lot of people into non-owner occupied and subjecting them to all of these concerns, even if they're coming back daily and checking on the houses and coming back to clean them, you know. And I think
Claire, but Claire, what about the grandfather? What about the grandfathering in? This is very important. What about the grandfathering in of those
Well,
non-owner
okay.
occupied?
So, Deborah, I appreciate the grandfathering, but here's the problem. The grandfathering only lasts until you die or till you sell. And that means that residents who maybe don't operate short-term rentals now, but you know, might need to do in the future. Because
Okay, so
they
when
get widowed, you know, I mean, because someone in their family gets COVID.
Okay, so one of your suggestions, Claire, would be that we take away, we amend the draft so that you can transfer it for the property. That would
Well,
solve
that
all
would
your
certainly
problems.
be one of my suggestions. But Deborah, I'm not just saying this for me. I care about other residents. Like, okay, we're already doing it, but what about other people that might need to do it in the future? It's going to be so hard. People don't have second units, you know, and they don't want to rent out rooms. And you know, in terms of, if I can, I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead. I mean, I think you're past your time, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, and I will try to make it really quick. I do also, you know, I agree with Felicia on some of the issues about equity. It seems like you're putting more regulations on residents than you are on hotels and motels, and you know, that's really not fair.
Claire, I think you know better than that. As a lawyer, I think you know that hotels have to comply with a lot more regulations than STRs.
Well,
than the few here. But we'll discuss that in another day. And I'm sorry, your time is up. But we will discuss that. There is far more the hotels have to comply with than STRs. And so I think you have to, you know,
even under these regulations.
Oh yes. And we'll make sure that we go through that and we document that. But to your point though, again, I don't want people to leave this meeting thinking that it's going to be so hard to have STRs in the future. They're in all but 3 districts. This is the suggestion in this draft, that in all but 3 districts where it's the most densely populated, their new STRs are permitted uses. There's really there's hardly any hurdle to have to pass to have new STRs in the future. There's only a hurdle, it's a conditional use for the most densely populated ones because you're potentially impacting your neighbors. That's all. But let's not make it sound like there's no ability to have STRs in the future. They're permitted uses that don't have to go through the planning board or anything. So that's what this draft provides for. So Bill, would you go on? Thank you, Claire, though, for your comments. And I've written down a number of good points. Okay, Bill?
Yes, up next, we have a gentleman that's using Chelsea's iPad.
Hello, yes, this is Michael McCool. I'm part of the McCool family of Rockport. Am I unmuted here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'll keep it short and sweet, but there's a few things here. The amount of regulations and it's most of what I have to say has already been touched on, but I mean, going into regulations on fire pits, and it's basically, where does it stop? Once it's started, it just goes and goes and goes. Where does it stop? A lot of the things that Felicia mentioned, those are definitely some big points that I agree with. Also, it certainly seems that it is a one-sided draft. That's my opinion. I might be wrong, but that is my opinion. I personally agree with, I believe the gentleman's name was Jamie, who mentioned maybe him or some other professionals working on the draft instead of it being, from my opinion, more of a one-sided. You know, you have some people in downtown Rockport who have complained and have got this whole thing rolling, and I just think it's a little one-sided. So having maybe somebody outside of the community or something else done is my opinion on it. The last thing is, like the board had mentioned earlier, there's somebody on the board mentioned it. There's a lot of businesses that do rely on the STRs, and you know, the main photographic workshop, and I mean, there's a number of them, and you know, that should definitely be taken into consideration as well. But the main thing I would say is, once you start with these regulations, it goes and goes and goes and goes, and then you can't walk outside and play catch with your kid without having to pay a fee or a fine or something. I mean, that's obviously to the extreme, but I hope you get my point. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Bill?
Yes, we've got Alex Cohen next.
Okay, can you hear me, guys?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just gonna read, I've got just some prepared statements. I'm not really gonna go through the ordinance draft per se, but I do have some comments in my prepared statement. My name is Alex Cohen. I own a property in Rockport. My mother rents a property that's a short-term rental in Rockport. I also own a rental management company, and I've been a realtor in the area for about 20 years. I echo the general comments about the genesis of this issue and the supposed need for an ordinance regarding short-term rentals. And I echo others that this basic exercise of discussing this ordinance is simply not warranted. So, like I said, I'm not really going to comment on the particular pieces of it. The history of the area has always welcomed short-term rentals and other casual rentals throughout the year, especially during the summer months. The main photographic workshops would never have survived these last 40 plus years without places for their staff, instructors, and students to stay. Camden and Rockport areas are historically tourist driven, and folks come throughout the year. It's what drives our economy. The growth in short-term rentals is simply a realization that this is how people travel. This is the sharing economy. This is how the world works these days. it might be slower to get up here to Rockport, but this is how the world works now. Just a few years ago, we used video cameras to shoot our families' special occasions or birthdays and the like, and we took taxi cabs if we needed to go somewhere. Now we use our phones to do our videos, and we take Uber or Lyft. Short-term rentals and the platforms that support them are simply a reality living in the 21st century. Perhaps change can be hard and feel different, and for some uncomfortable. However, the fact that people want to come to our area and spend time is a wonderful opportunity that many communities simply don't have. Why would we want to discourage people from coming to the area by limiting options where they may have for their stay? We want to limit where the main media workshops can house their staff, instructors, or students. I don't think they could survive if they had to house these people in hotels, or even if there were enough hotel rooms in the area. Ditto for the main Center for Furniture Craftsmanship, ditto for SIF, ditto for so many other businesses in our area that rely on tourism.
About 30 seconds, Alex.
People want to visit, and our town should welcome visitors who want to enjoy our town and the businesses in the natural resources and opportunities that we have. The notion that we need short-term rental ordinance is sort of backward, and it's illogic. I'm just going to skip to the end. Basically, in closing, Rockport's a wonderful place to live and a wonderful place to visit. We don't want to discourage the latter. We want to maintain the ability of our communities to accommodate people who want to visit and spend money and enjoy our area. This is what drives our economy. I don't think adding layers of bureaucracy and paranoid regulations because a few in the community may not like rentals for some reason, when the vast majority of people and owners in Rockport want to be able to do what they want with their properties, whether it's having a rental or not. Limiting property rights is never a good path to go down. So I urge the board to table this issue, as there are more important issues that the town can spend time on. Let's work on positive issues. Let's, instead of going back in time, let's be forward thinking and realize this is how people travel and live. This is what's going on in the world. Restricting further will just do a disservice to Rockport and its owners and residents.
Thank you, Alex.
Yep.
Bill?
Yeah, so I inadvertently had skipped over Hunani Wallace. I didn't know that she wanted to speak. We obviously had let Marcia and Victor both speak, so I'm going to let Hunani speak.
Sure, Hunani, right.
Thank you. So I really appreciate Alex's comments, because that echoes the things that we had to say. And one additional thing I want to say is, we moved to Rockport. We fell in love with Rockport. We loved the select board's forward-looking feelings when we moved here, but it was sort of all American. And now we're putting in regulations, as everyone else has said, that are sort of, nobody really feels like we need them. At least nobody has spoken in favor of them here. And I quite frankly think that rather than focusing on short-term rentals, maybe you should think about the comprehensive plan that hasn't been updated in 16 years and working on other things, especially in view of the fact that we're in a pandemic. And, as people have said before, we need the opportunity to speak in person. And the only in-person opportunity we've had was in September. This was a very poorly notified meeting when it was limited attendance. And the second, not one of several, but the second opportunity was a Zoom call that, again, was a small meeting during the pandemic, and now this one. And I, quite frankly, haven't heard one person speak up and say, hey, we want regulations.
Thank you, Hunani. We have, just so that everybody knows, we had put together all of the letters we received at one point in time, did we not, Bill? And we made those publicly available. And there were plenty of letters in there saying that they wanted regulation. Do we have those collected in one spot?
We did, and I just checked the website while we're having this discussion, and we've got notes up there from the two workshops, but I don't see the letters. So we're going to make sure we get those up onto the website. So
yeah, I think that would be helpful so that people had access to those, because we did put those together and make those publicly available, and make sure to include the most recent one that we just received a couple of days ago.
Yes. Yeah.
As the comprehensive plan, just because Hunani raised it, we are trying to update the comprehensive plan, but unfortunately, that is a large group of people, and they have just, the committee has decided that they do not want to meet until they meet in person. So there's not anything that the select board can do about that. And secondly, in terms of meeting in person, you know, we're trying to do the best we can with the pandemic. And honestly, there are more people that we can accommodate through Zoom than we can if we had had it in the Opera House. Bill?
Yep. So up next is Charles Cava.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Hi, so I'd call myself a novice observer to small town politics. Even though I've lived here for a long time, there's some things that have happened recently that have caused me to want to pay more attention. I just have a simple procedural question. Typically, how are ordinances formulated, modified, and approved? Does it start with the Ordinance Review Committee and come to the Select Board? Does it go back and forth? Just what's the usual way ordinances like the one under discussion tonight happen?
Bill, do you want to respond to that? I think it depends on the ordinance.
It does depend on the ordinance. Sometimes staff will draft an ordinance. For instance, the fireworks ordinance that was just recently passed, that came out of complaints from residents about fireworks, about consumer fireworks. And so that was drafted by staff and then went to the select board for their review and comment. Other times, if there are land use ordinance questions, it'll be asked by the planning board to the ORC to draft changes to the land use ordinance. So there's a variety of ways that ordinances are developed. They always have to go through the select board at some point in order to be put onto any vote by the townspeople.
And sometimes they're drafted by outside counsel.
Yep, sometimes our outside counsel drafts them. Yeah, and outside counsel always weighs in and edits and reviews any of the ordinances as well.
Right.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you. Bill, next.
Yep, next is Mario Turi.
Yes, I'm Mario Turi, and I came just to listen to what people were saying. Although I am a renter on Warrenton Street, and have had very good experience with that. But I'm not prepared to make any statements about my opinions right now. I'm trying to decide what I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Okay, next.
Up next, it looks like we have Lynn.
Hello. Hi, I'm Lynn Funnyman. I have some questions about the origins of the restrictions. First, I wanted to know why STRs are treated differently than regular home rentals. The question that has been brought up about the police reports to justify the problems, are there more problems with STRs? And it was said that the police don't separate it that way, but they certainly know by addresses, and the Airbnbs or the STRs are listed by addresses. I want to know, is there justification that the STRs are treated differently than regular residential residents? On the issue of the lack of long-term rentals, I wonder if the town of Rockport has ever assisted in establishing affordable housing in Rockport if they're concerned about this. Have they applied for HUD money to develop such housing? And has the town of Rockport offered incentives to develop affordable housing? Why is it justifiable to limit a private investor in housing to a number of units unless they provide such affordable long-term housing? I wondered if you could share what are the number of Airbnbs in Rockport compared to the number of long-term residential rentals? And how is an STR more like a hotel or inn to justify the business or commercial designation than it is like a regular rental? I refer to density issues of occupants per building, a history of police complaints, a history of deaths or other tangible negatives in these various types of accommodation. If only the length of stay differentiates STRs from regular residential units, why are they grouped as commercial with motels and inns? And what is the reason to justify different treatment to an STR in terms of registering when these conditions are not applied to a residential dwelling? What are the reasons to justify the limitation of the number of STRs owned by residents and non-residents in Rockport? And my final question, I think you've clarified, was pursuant to Section 3, changes to existing ordinances. In item 3, it indicates that Section 917C shall be amended to add non-owner occupied STRs as a commercial use, which goes back to my question as to why they have to be a commercial use. With conditional use in districts 901, 904, and 913, and permitted use in the other districts. Can you clarify, I think you have, that this implies that all the other districts, 902, 903, 906, 907, 908, 909, and 916, STRs are permitted use. Is this the same with owner-occupied STRs? I guess I'm concerned as to why there's such a push for this to be government controlled. It seems to me that for many years, and I've owned property in Rockport for many years, I had a bed and breakfast, I've had rental apartments and other rentals. And I don't understand why the fairness or legal standing to initiate these restrictions in a free market rental economy, which appears to have been working well in Rockport without government interference. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, up we have next we have Julie Wheaton.
Hi, thank you for having me today, and thank you for having this meeting. I pretty much mirror a lot of the people that have spoken so far. In the past, I have had short-term rentals, whether it be yacht crew, people off the islands. That's something nobody ever talks about. You get stuck off the ferry. Sometimes you can't. Oh, excuse me. You can't always get back. And this has been going on, you know, people have talked about 20 years, 30 years. Well, I'm going to say over 60 years. There's always been short-term rentals of one nature or another, boarding houses, places where people could stay while they waited. And in the summertime, we don't have enough bedrooms in this community to say that we're on a head-to-head competition from June, or actually July 1st, just before the 4th of July to Columbus Day. We don't have that many bedrooms. And in the wintertime, when there's the Camden Conference going on, there's no bedrooms around. There's very few. I think there were 10 in February after the Camden Conference at the Country Inn. I know, I put on a meeting and people came for just the day. So I read the draft, and I do have some concerns, as most people did, overreaching, over-regulation. If I allow a dog to be at my house, I don't need someone to tell me to pick up the poop at my house. Okay, that's overreaching. And I understand that you copied and pasted a lot of this. I do have one question for the board. And I understand that Bill said that you write ordinances all sorts of different ways. One, why didn't you task the ROC? Whoops, here we go. Why didn't you task the ROC to write this ordinance? I understand we have a bunch of lawyers here, and my grandfather was on that board, and he always said, don't ever underestimate the public here. They're not stupid. So please keep that in mind. Why didn't you task the ROC to write the ordinance?
The ORC.
Why?
The ORC. Two members of the ORC.
And if we are, yeah, the ordinance.
I'm trying to answer your question. Two members of the ORC did draft this.
Were they tasked by the chairman, or was this something that was asked of them?
They were asked to draft this this draft, and the select board knew exactly what was being done.
So the chairman,
The chairman of the ORC reports to the select board. The ORC
correct, but did the chairman,
serves at the
did
pleasure
you,
of the select board, not the opposite.
did you ask your husband to write this?
I just told you the select board understood that we were going to draft it. They knew exactly how it was being drafted. Please do not make this into something that it's not. Denise, would you like to add something there as the ORC liaison?
I think what happened is when we first started with the ORC, there's so many policy decisions, and that's sort of the purview of the select board, where the ORC at first was like, how do we draft this? We don't know where the policy is. What does the select board want? You can't draft an ordinance in a vacuum.
Don't you usually?
This is a straw man proposal. We really, just because it's drafted with these provisions in there, it was our best attempt to take into account what we were hearing from other select board members at the discussion earlier in the summer, as well as what we were hearing from the public. Short of, obviously we have a draft regulation, so we're not following the people who say you shouldn't regulate it at all, because then we wouldn't even have a draft ordinance. But short of that, we are not hearing, I hear that, some of the specific things there's been overreaching, but we're not hearing a lot of comment that goes to the core and what's wrong with this ordinance as drafted. And I'm not saying, what I'm hearing from people is we shouldn't have any ordinance.
I understand. I only got a couple of minutes, so
I shouldn't take up your time. I'm sure Bill will give you that time.
And then I also went back and I read all of the comments from the board and the public on the last two meetings, because that's what was available, because you can go right to short-term rental. I searched profoundly for the testimonies, looking for backups to be able to back up what was being said. Yeah. Deborah, you said your car got blocked in, your driveway was blocked in, but you didn't call the police to get it towed. John Veman very much
I did call the police.
Was very much at the I hope you did. I've done it many times.
I did.
I'm really good at it.
I did, and I called the entity that was supposed to be renting the place, who told me they were too busy having pizza in Belfast to do anything to help me.
About 30 seconds.
Tow it. The town has great tools to deal with our neighbors or situations of people speeding. The ordinance appears to pit neighbor against neighbor. I understand that there are issues with short-term rentals. And sometimes people like to party. Some people, they're here to have a good time and they come and go. But the ordinance is too overreaching and very restrictive on the length of time per year that you can have a short-term rental. I think it's unrealistic to have no more than 7 days, 3 times a year.
No, Julie, that's not what it says. No. There's a misunderstanding there. There is no limit on the number of times that you can rent on a short-term rental basis. I said that in my opening remarks. Maybe you didn't catch that. No, there's a minimum. There's a minimum of 7 days with a non-owner occupied, so that you don't have with the non-owner.
People are just gonna 7 days
coming in every day or 2 days, right? And that's what Camden has. And we just heard somebody from one of the James, I think, that said that actually was helpful when Camden did that. So no, that is the only restriction there on on non-owner occupied. No, you can rent. You can rent, if you register your non-owner occupied rental, you can rent every single day of the year. There's no restriction on that.
Okay, good. So then I must have misread that several times.
Yeah, no, but I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to clarify that in case anybody else was reading that.
Yeah, exactly. Because when I read it, it really.
No, absolutely not. And so that was another thing that I think is not going to make some of the people who have concerns about short-term rentals happy. But it was another area where Denise and I tried to compromise, you know, I mean, with grandfathering in the current ones and saying, you know, you can
only grandfather in if you have a main tax, if you run it that way.
Well, if you show that you have been,
it's very
show that you have been renting.
But the 3 times, that goes to the definition of a short-term rental. You're not even in this regulation at all if you only rent it out 3 times.
Yeah, like,
Well,
so say somebody who's
going to
goes
rent
out of
it out
town.
17, up to like 17 times until Columbus Day, because that's the amount of weeks in the
Right.
summer.
Yeah, and then yeah.
But for those people who say go out of town for a couple weeks, and while they're out of town on vacation for a couple weeks, and they want to rent their place when they're out of town for a couple weeks, right? You can do that 3 times, and you're not even in the definition of short-term rental. So we tried to, we put that in there only to be broader and exclude more people and more instances from even being a short-term rental.
Excellent. Yeah. So yes, it definitely is a draft. It definitely needs to be, I think, a little bit better fit for the town. And then there's always going to be casual renters, because what will happen is if it is far reaching and it is more regulatory like, or it's going to go underground. You know, right now we'll need extra staff to enact and enforce this, but it will go underground, and that you really don't want that. But
well, you know,
looking forward, I'd like it. I would definitely like to see this table so we can all get together, and more exclusive, more people in town that, you know, maybe are kind of tough on the technology here and don't want to try to get on Zoom or try to live stream, try to type it.
But people can submit written comments, and, you know, and, you know, frankly, the business of the town, I mean, whether or not this goes on a June ballot and what the voters do with it, I don't, you know, it's up to them. But and whether or not we get it on a June ballot because of all the technology issues, who knows? Okay. But I just want people to understand, we're working on this, and just because, you know, just because we have these pandemic issues doesn't mean that the work of the town comes to a screeching halt. And so we're pushing through on a number of initiatives we have, and this is one of them. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Julie. Bill?
So, yep, Peabody Southwell is next.
Thank you. I had a chance to read through the ordinance, and a few things jumped out at me. I first want to say that, of course, with many of the other speakers tonight, I own a house in Rockport, and because I can't afford to pay for it for my own enjoyment without renting it when I'm not there, I do run a non-owner occupied short-term rental as described. And I echo the sentiments that I don't quite understand why there is a need for any regulation at all, but considering that this is a draft, I do have some comments on it specifically. I thought that while I can appreciate the desire to grandfather those of us who do have existing short-term rentals, I'm very concerned about not having a clause about inheritance. I mean, for me, I have a legacy of family who has rented short-term and then purchased property long-term in the area for 100 years. And so the idea that my property and my massive, at this point, investment would not be protected for my children to have a similar use in their lifetime is disturbing. And I think that certainly the sale, perhaps that's a totally different kind of detail, but inheritance, I think, should be very specifically outlined. Additionally, I am concerned about some of the language that does seem to pit neighbor against neighbor, and I'm particularly sensitive to this because John Veman is my neighbor. And I consider him and Amy friends who I share meals with when I'm in town, and we have a friendly interaction. But I know that they've taken really a strong stand. In one case that I do want to correct, if I hope this possibly could not be part of my time because this is just a technical matter, that in reading through the comments, I wanted to correct the record in one comment that John Beeman made about Tim Montague, who is also a neighbor, and me at a public hearing about short-term rentals on September 19th, 2019. He had said, and I'm quoting this from the town's website, "We have two properties, one directly next to us and one directly across the street, that just in the last year or last year and a half were purchased and then money put into them to renovate. Both buyers, their intent was never to live there. It was strictly to make it an Airbnb and a business." I just want to clarify that that is a bold mischaracterization of my intentions when I purchased the house and my actions in the present, which of course John and Amy are very well aware because we are friendly. I bought it and renovated it for my own enjoyment, seasonal use, and in the long term to retire there, and I have never considered the home a business. Renting it out when I'm unable to be there and enjoy it myself makes it possible for me to keep the property, particularly after my financially disastrous renovation, which would not be a good business move for anyone. So that should prove that this wasn't a business for me at all. And then lastly, I wanted to say as to the ordinance, I wondered if possibly with us being grandfathered in, those of us who are grandfathered in, if there was room to have, as long as you do not add, as I saw, there was a note that possibly you would consider a limitation on dates annually. But maybe there's room to give other property owners, if they were to come into a financial situation that they needed to do some kind of short-term rental, that there was more of an allotment in a registration for people to have a limited use, like a limited time annually, so that the infinite time annually was the grandfathered element, and that you would consider short-term rental for people in for shorter periods of time, because I do think that that is something that property owners in such a beloved area would want to have. That's all.
Thank you, Peabody. And those are, really good suggestions for the board to consider. I do really hear you on the and several other people here on the inheritance versus the sale. I think those are really very good comments that I personally am going to really take to heart. I hear what you're saying and it was a good creative suggestion with respect to the infinite versus limited time. But also keep in mind that we're not trying to limit, we're not trying to just grandfather in what's there and say there's no more in the future. That's not the intent, and that's not how this is drafted. Just to be clear for people on the call. Anyway, thank you again. Bill?
Yep. Up next is Betsy Elwin.
Hi. First of all, I would like to thank you for presenting this draft because I think it's really hard to talk in the abstract until you have words on the paper. As you can see tonight, a lot of people disagree with the words, but at least you have them, so I appreciate that. And I'd also like to go on record as saying that I am in favor of a regulation. I don't think this one is particularly onerous. And I do think that you've attempted to balance, and maybe you can adjust the balance a little bit, but I think it's important to try to balance the needs of the people that own properties and rent them out with the neighbors who have to deal with the short-term renters who, of course, I rent out, I would be an owner-occupied rental, and I have nothing against people coming and renting places in Rockport, but I do recognize that it does create issues for some neighbors, because when it's your neighbor, you can talk to your neighbor. But if you don't know who the people are and you don't know who owns the place, it's really hard to deal with issues that come up. And I think the fact that the police have not been called doesn't mean that there aren't issues. Just because people don't think that it rises to the level of, making a police call doesn't mean that they're not having issues. Having said that, I mean, tonight we were supposed to be dealing with the actual proposed regulation. So I'll turn to that and just say, I think one sort of technical thing is that it should be clearer that this is intended to be an annual registration. Because at first, I thought it was just a one-time registration until later on it became clear to me that it was annual. So I think that should be made a little clearer. I also think the moratorium section might need to be adjusted because the way I'm not quite sure how it would work, because it says upon adoption of the ordinance, there would be a 2-year moratorium on acceptance of additional registrations, but you won't have the initial ones until this is adopted. So I'm not sure how you can have the moratorium run from that same point.
Excellent point.
So
Excellent point.
I think that just needs a little adjusting.
Yep.
The other thing I wanted to say is that I think that doing this registration process at least is a way for the town to know what's going on in the town, because a lot of people have raised points about, you know, you can't tell the difference between the owner occupied and it's true, you can't tell the difference, but that's the point, that the town can't make decisions about what's needed unless the town really understands what's going on. And so I think that this is a way, in a fairly non-onerous way. You do an annual registration, you pay a small fee, and then the town has some idea what's going on, whether there are streets that are completely rentals for short-term visitors, or whether it's a mix. And I think that might be important information. And maybe down the road, you'll decide, you know what, we don't need a regulation anymore, and then you can remove it. But I think to just say we don't need a regulation because there's no problem is ignoring the fact that there are people who have had problems. They may not be police problems, but they're problems that cause people to lose the enjoyment of their properties. So, you know, to say, well, this impinges upon my property rights really doesn't consider the other side of the balance, which is your neighbors have property rights too. And if they're losing the enjoyment of their property because of the actions of short-term renters that can't really be controlled as well because people don't know what's going on, or there's no phone number. This just gives you a phone number. You know who to call. I don't think
about
that's
30 seconds.
I don't think that's terribly onerous. So thank you again for putting this forward. And I know it needs work, and that's the point.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Betsy. Bill?
So Ruth Wall is next.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So Betsy is the first person I have heard speak who seemed to perhaps have contemplated having a complaint about short-term rentals. I would very much like to see the record of that. And I think I'd like to see the record of people who have complained in writing, but you would think, my having experience from a larger town and town meetings, when something is contentious and people are unhappy, both sides show up and have their say. And it seems that mostly people who own short-term rentals are the ones who are speaking now. I am not owner occupied. I am one of the people who have inherited a house. And this is the way that we are able to keep it in the family. We live nearby, over the mountains where it's a little less expensive. And I, from experience renting a house in Massachusetts, doing short-term rental there before we moved here, have seen a trend over the 10 years that I've been a manager of short-term rentals, that less and less people are able to stay for a week. And I had a big empty August a couple years ago for our house in Rockport, when I had the thing set up to only accept people for 7 days. And it was only after I shortened it to 4 days that I was able to fill August, which is the month that you would expect would fill up. So that's a comment. The 7 days concerns me. I would much rather rent for a week and not have to take care of cleaning, which I do myself more often. That's a pain. But I think the trend is going away from people having a whole week. I don't think I have anything else.
I'm sorry, that's very helpful to know. Thank you. That was a question that we had actually in drafting this, so that's very helpful. Thank you, Ruth. Now, Ruth, did you say that you have a non-owner occupied rental, right?
My husband and I and his brother and wife inherited from his parents.
Right, and so
who were Rockport residents for years and years, grew up in Rockport.
But it's non-owner occupied and it would be grandfathered in presumably, right?
Yes, and so lucky me, but
well, lucky everybody on this call, basically, I would think, gets, so, but anyway.
So I still wonder, where are the people who really don't like having short-term rentals in town? I would think they would be on this call as well.
Yeah, as I said, we have letters and we have produced those publicly before, and Bill will put those on the website. They are there.
But it didn't matter. Didn't matter enough for them to show up tonight. And
I would
that's
imagine
the fun and excitement of a town meeting, is if you get lots of different opinions, and instead we're all kind of nattering at you, which is too bad.
Oh yeah, I know, I'm getting used to that. But Ruth, I think that what we have found in talking to some of these people, they have written letters, they have come in and made statements, but they feel a number of them are very uncomfortable because it pits owner against owner, and they don't like, their neighbors, they don't like to come in and be seen to be complaining about their neighbors, but they do it to us behind the scenes, or we do have the letters, which we have made available and will continue to make available, and I guess put on the website. So, I mean, there is that factor there at play. So, okay, but thank you, Ruth, appreciate it. And you're another example of the inheritance that, I think is an important one to keep in mind. Okay, Bill?
Yep, up next we have Kai.
Okay.
I'm not sure if Kai is still there. They're on the call, but I have no video. So I guess we'll skip.
You still
I'm sorry, I'm trying to unstart. I'm trying to. Oh, there it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it looked like they were muted. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's only I've only a handful of Zoom calls, so I'm learning. I have to say, I fall right in the middle, and I help manage a property, so I can see kind of both sides. I come from a hotel background, and I tell you, I learned to love Maine by staying in short-term rentals, and now we live here permanently. And but we come from Denver, and that got taken over with short-term rentals. It was pretty bad. And I don't know that we need to necessarily worry about, this is something I haven't really heard people address, is that worry about people who are residents owning a short-term property, because they're invested in the community. They care about their property and their neighbors, and maybe they're renting it out temporarily, or just trying to get by for a few years until they can move up, or whatever it is that they're trying to do and create in their life. They have that investment. But then you've got places like Denver where lots of outside interests, like Dubai, seriously, huge property owner in Denver. They just snap them up and then create a problem. And eventually it got so bad that Denver just banned all Airbnbs unless they were owner occupied, flat out. And it opened this whole thing, because they too were having issues with long-term rentals. So, I can kind of see how, I don't feel like these proposed changes, most of them are too difficult. I think that you're thinking about staying ahead of a problem that's going to happen here. There's a huge population explosion happening in Maine. Homes that were sitting on the market for years are suddenly selling a week after they put them back on the market. We've got 35 new children in the elementary school in Belfast, just in Belfast. I don't know what the other statistics are. as more people come in, we're going to have more and more interest in monetizing the community from outside interests, not from inside interests. Mainers are good at just kind of getting by, and that's something we love about this area. So maybe that's something to consider. And maybe something else to consider is that property rights don't mean that you're not part of that community. You buy in an area and you agree to be a member of that community, and that community says, we're interested in creating this. And it's just part of being a part of a community. So I understand, you know, and I'm for short-term rentals, but I understand that there needs to be some regulation to be able to be living in the community. And I think as a first draft, this was pretty good. I agree with what Peabody said, but she's my friend. So, you know, that's my disclaimer. I think that we need to be careful how we grow this, but it's good that you're thinking about it. I don't know. That's just kind of my take on the situation, because I've seen it happen. We almost bought in Mumjoy Hill in Portland, and that would have been a disaster, because that is now, it's a shell of a neighborhood because there's so many. I mean, the proliferation of Airbnbs there is absurd. So I wouldn't want to see that happen, but I also want to be able to come and visit a community and really get to know it and stay someplace that's beautiful and wonderful. And the other thing I wanted to say is that it's great that the businesses want to weigh in, but when businesses start writing laws, they become lobbyists, and that's not community interest. So let's be balanced about this, please. I would hate to see this passed over to the places that manage these properties, say, here you go. And I know that's not what's being talked about, but I think that it's something to consider. And I also think that having a cap on the number of rentals is a really good idea. Nobody needs 15 short-term property rentals. At that point, what are you doing? I mean, I'm not sure how that works, and I'm not a professional lawyer or property owner or any of that. I just feel like the gig economy is exploding and people are making money off it, including myself. But that when you have past a certain point, and then that point, you're basically a hotel that just has separate cabins. I mean, we used to do those in Yosemite. We have the whole cabin area. So I don't know. That's just my viewpoint. And thank you for allowing me to speak and for listening so patiently. And I know I'm not a good public speaker. I'm sorry. I do think that you're off to a good start. And I think that that there's compromise available in this community and the communities surround it, because what this community does is going to affect what the others do. And as such, I think you're doing a great job. That's all.
Thank you, Kai.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Bill, next.
Yeah, up next, we have somebody that's called in that doesn't have video. The number is 230-9510. So I don't know if they can unmute and speak.
Can you, it looks like, do you have them muted, Bill, or they've muted themselves?
Well, everybody's muted, and I've asked them to unmute, so I'm not sure if they can or not, and I can't.
You don't have access.
Okay.
So we did, I don't know if you want to go back to Melissa McCool, if she had anything that she wanted to add.
Yeah. Sorry for whoever we're not able to unmute, but please, give us something by email and, get us your comments in another way. Thanks. Yeah, Melissa, is Melissa our last remaining person then?
Yes.
Okay, Melissa.
Hi, I do have some additional comments to make and a question. My family and I own a non-owner occupied short-term rental, as well as 5 long-term rentals in Rockport. The first thing that I have pause with is this 7-day minimum. We have found in our, we certainly get 7 days. We get them longer than that. We've even had traveling nurses for a month or 2 months at a time. but the bulk of it is really less than 7 days, like Ruth was saying. I would, just to pick a number, I'd say, you know, we're anywhere from 3 to 5 days.
Great.
And
That's what
that
I
is-
was going to ask you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really the bulk of it. It really is. So 7 days would be a stretch for us, even though we'd be grandfathered, and that's wonderful. So that's my first comment. My
Okay,
second
great.
comment was, I don't know what section this is, but it, for non-owner occupied, there was the talk of information that you would need would be months available, number of nights in the prior calendar year, gross income from that, and a copy of the Maine state lodging tax. That's a lot of information that I really wouldn't want to give out. First of all, Maine state lodging, we're Airbnb, so that's completely taken care of. We never even see that. We don't even know what they're paying in sales tax because Airbnb charges the other side. They don't charge us. So they're paying it in for us. That would be very difficult. I'm not even sure if you could get that information. But anyway, my gross income that I took in, I don't know if I want to.
Yeah, you know what? Let me just tell you where that was coming from, and this is just a placeholder, and I get where that is a concern for you. It is a placeholder because most businesses have to pay personal property business tax or business tax on their personal property. And that was a placeholder, and I should have explained that in my initial comments because it's in there with reference to the non-owner occupied, but not with the owner occupied. But it was a placeholder because what we need to do is talk to the town assessor and so forth because this is a commercial activity. It could fall under the part in our existing ordinances that require the payment of tax, which I don't think is a lot, but still on personal property that relates to the business.
So like furnishings and stuff like that?
Yeah. And so it's not a suggestion by us that should be done. It was a placeholder for us to come back to talk to people about, including the town's assessor, to come back to. So for example, if it means that we have to specifically exempt short-term rentals or whatever, but it was a placeholder for us to remember that it needs to be addressed and dealt with. So that was the whole purpose for that income part, and because that's what we understood from the assessor that would be needed. But anyway, so please just see that as a placeholder for further discussion. Okay.
So Melissa, can I just ask a question? And Bill, I hope you'll just I don't want to take up your time by me asking the question for clarification, but because Airbnb handles the state lodging tax, you don't file anything along the lines of what we've called here. There's no such thing as a Maine state lodging tax return that you file. Okay.
No. If we were not going through Airbnb, there might be, but probably VRBO and all of them, and maybe James can even talk to that with Camden Accommodations. I don't know how they handle it, but for us, no, we don't even get to see. And you know, when we started with Airbnb, I got to tell you, that was the first thing I looked at. I'm like, who's paying the tax here? Because I don't want to get caught 6 months down the road or a year down the road and have somebody come back and tell me that I owe $1,500 in sales lodging tax. So I went round and round with them on that and made sure that they are in fact.
Yeah, okay. That's good to know, and we need to have further discussions about that because the only reason that we were requesting, in this in this draft, the Maine state lodging tax form was because that was supposedly, it was our understanding that everybody would have that. Right. And it was our way of showing that you really have been engaged in this business. And so therefore you should be grandfathered in. That was the purpose. So, we need to noodle around about other ways to be able to show for that grandfathering purposes. But thank you for raising that.
Okay, now this is an interesting one because there's been discussion tonight on how many people have complained or how many people or whatever. But the one that gets me is that talking about short-term rentals taking over long-term rental availability. how is that even quantified? How do you even try to go about figuring, well, they have a short-term rental that could be a long-term rental and it's not, so therefore it's taking away from the long-term rental stock. How do you do that? How do you
Well, it's difficult to know that, obviously, but you know, as one of the speakers said, I think it was Betsy Elwin, we don't know what we don't know. I mean, in Rockport, we have no documentation on how many short-term rentals there are. We don't know, and so we can't even begin to address some of these issues if we don't even know what we have. So the registration process is the very first step in figuring that out.
Okay, because that comment that was made, again, I've got my stuff is all out of order here, but I guess it was under the first page, whatever. It says here, the select board believes it's in the best interest of the town to address the fundamental issue of whether its primary objective is to be a tourist town or one that places priority on long-term residents. I think we can do both because we have done both for so long.
Yeah, but you guys are one of the few that we know of, and maybe we don't know of enough, again, because we don't have that that database. But you're one of the few. You're one of the few. I mean, you are sort of the poster child. Sorry to say, for the people that we want to show to incentivize for long-term housing, because you have contributed, and we thank you for that, to the long-term housing market. But and we want to incentivize people like you to do exactly that, and others.
Yeah, and which I really appreciate. But again, I think we are both. I mean, I know we're changing, but we are a tourist town, and you know, I don't want to say Camden's a tourist town, and we're not, because we're almost, you know, one and the same. But anyway, I want the tourists here.
Sure. And we're not suggesting that we don't, Melissa, but anybody, and I invite you and anybody else to go back and look at some of the statements that were made in September. And it wasn't just limited to then, but in the September workshop, there were several people who talked about how they were unable to get long-term rentals here. And to the extent that they were able to get some long-term rentals, they were kicked out during the summer because of the short-term rentals. And
which has been historical. I can remember being a young person here myself, and I'd go, what do you mean I have to get out in April or May? I only got here in October, but that's the way it was, you know, and we just learned how to deal with it. But I know that was 30 some odd years ago. So, okay, so let's see. I guess just end with a question. You may have started possibly with a timeline for a vote, but not necessarily. Are you trying to get to a June ballot? Do you know? Are you?
Yeah, the select board had aimed at getting to a June ballot vote, but I think I personally think what's more important is to make this right. Rather than make it fast. And we're not making it fast. I mean, you might recall that we had been planning for a November vote. I mean, it's something that, you know, we started back more than a year ago. But of course, COVID intervened, et cetera, et cetera. I, for one, you know, am happy I'm fine if it goes past June. I just want to get it right, or get it as right as we can. But we are right now aiming for June, and I'm just 20% of the votes on the select board.
Just one last comment, and that was probably Felicia. I know that I always go like this. Camden had a problem. The B&Bs had a problem. They said, hey, there's too many of these short-term rental people coming in, and they're not regulated like we are. And so they instituted the 7-day minimum rule to try to cut back on that. And if you go south, Rockland really must have had a real big problem with people coming in and buying just for investment purposes only, because people really didn't like that. But we don't have either of those issues here. None of our hotels, motels, Samoset have made any comments whatsoever about us short-term rental guys. They don't seem to have a problem with us. You know, if they have, they certainly haven't come forward to say that. And well, anyway, I could go on and on too. But I think, oh, I did have one last question, Deb. What you spoke earlier at the beginning about conditional versus permitted districts. Could you clarify that just a little bit more? Is that something that's already set, or is it something that would come? Or
again, it's just part of the draft in terms of identifying which ones those are. But Denise, you're the
Yeah, I can.
so well, let's let Denise answer that. Okay, Melissa.
Well, so the town's divided up into different zoning districts, and a lot of what we were, some of what we heard at various meetings is, okay, maybe this is a village issue. People are closer together, and if you've got a short-term rental next door, it's noisy, but you know, over here on the other side of Route 1, we don't have this issue at all. We've got a lot of land. We have a nice garage or carriage house that we rent out. So maybe this is something in the more concentrated zoning districts. So this was an attempt to sort of focus on those areas. So under the way our land use ordinance works is you can designate uses as either permitted, conditional use, or aren't allowed at all in each zoning district. So what this does is it says that for 901, which is the Harbor Village District, 904, which is the residential district, and 913, which is the downtown district, only those three districts are short-term rentals listed as conditional uses. And that means you need to go through more of an approval process in order to operate a short-term rental if you're not a grandfathered short-term rental.
Right.
For all other zoning districts, you don't need that kind of approval. You still have to file the registration and meet the parking and the health and safety standards, but you don't need to get approval based on number of short-term rentals in the area or whatever criteria would be used to grant the use. It's a permitted use in all other zoning districts. So that was an attempt to address the concerns we were hearing that all of Rockport isn't the same with respect to concerns of short-term rentals.
Well, great. My last comment would be, yeah, if we could meet in person, that would be great, like everybody else has said, but and to slow it down maybe a little bit. But thank you. Thanks for letting us all talk. I know I'm the last one. I'm probably the last one online. I don't know, but
no, you're not. But thank you, Melissa.
Okay.
So, Bill, is that all of our?
That is all. I do have somebody on live stream that basically the two comments from Jessica Ward that she would oppose the 7-day minimum. And she also said that she thinks she would rather try to meet the requirements that any lodging business has to meet than have these stipulations.
Okay. Great. Okay, thank you.
If I might, I have.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Just sorry, Mark. Just one thing. Were those all the live stream comments, Bill? Bill?
I'm just looking. Yeah, she says she finds the meeting on Zoom to be challenging, but understands because of COVID. Yeah. She said she thinks that hotels would foster spread more so than a short-term rental.
Okay. That's it then? It was just one person. I thought that there was maybe comments from a second person. No.
Yes, back to me. Thank you. I did a little.
Did you say no? I'm sorry.
No, I did a little.
Bill, did you say no? There were no more comments?
No more comments.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Mark. Okay, we just need to have some order here. Okay, Mark.
I believe he said that earlier, but
I missed it. I'm sorry. I'm trying to look at lots of different places here.
So I did a little unscientific poll, and I think I was very fair when I noted this down. We had, by my count, we had 8 people that were in the middle of the road. They could understand it, but they weren't really for it or against it. You had 3 that were spoke against it, and there were 11 that, excuse me, there were 3 that were in favor of it and 11 that were against it, which totals 22 people, I think, might have spoken, if I got that correct. And there again, I think I used everybody fairly in listening to what they were saying, but that's just my unscientific numbers.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Okay, it was not our intent. Again, this was here for a discussion. It's not here for an action item. I think we've had enough of, you know, the short-term rental discussion for all of us for one night. It's 8:19 and we've got 2 executive sessions that we still have to hold tonight. So I appreciate and thank everybody who participated, and the board will discuss what the next steps are. Thank you. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is just discuss takeaways from the meeting that we had with the Rockport School Board representatives. And I didn't mean for this to be some protracted discussion. We don't need to do that. But I just thought that after we did have the discussion that we did, which was cut short, of course, that it might be valuable for us to just have a bit of a discussion about takeaways. I guess I'll start it off. I don't
know if Bill has gotten everybody else off the call yet.
Okay. All right. He's working on it, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
We'll get a couple more.
Okay.
There.
Okay.
Assuming that Mark is iPhone.
Yeah.
And somebody that works for Bill is Rockport EV. I think we're now good.
Yeah.
All right.
How about live stream? Have we shut off?
Live stream's on.
No, we're not in executive session yet.
Yeah.
All
no,
right.
live
Let's just
stream's
make
on.
sure.
Yeah, we've got just a couple more things before we go to executive session.
Okay.
So anyway, so back to what I was saying, that I just thought it'd be worth having a few minute discussion as, you know, takeaways from our school board representative meeting. And just in the interest of starting it off, I'll just say that I thought it was very interesting that some of the board representatives basically said that, you know, this is my paraphrasing them, okay? But I had the impression that they thought it was a little difficult to hold the line on expenses and so forth when the constituents, the people who are appearing before them at school board meetings, are all people who, you know, understandably parents want more spent at the schools. And reference was made to that group that Alex Armentrout used to chair. I didn't know the name of it before, but I know it's been referenced to us a couple times, Value in Education, I think. So I just wonder if we might want to encourage, this is not a select board thing, but we might want to encourage or identify some people who might have an interest in forming a citizens group. I mentioned this to Camden chair and town manager in a meeting that we were recently in that we'll talk about later. They said that they had a couple of people in mind because, you know, Camden and Rockport have the same interests here to, you know, to make sure that we're all accountable and so forth, not suggesting that the school district is not, but it is a large portion of both of our budgets. You know, they had some ideas of some people that they thought were Camden residents that might be interested in being in such a group. So I just wanted to throw that out there for your, you know, everybody's consideration.
What would be what are the thoughts in terms of what would the purpose of the group be and how would they function?
Well, I mean, it's up to the group, right? Because it's not a, you know, a Camden Rockport, you know, official group. It would be a citizens group that forms on their own. But I would imagine that that they would probably look at how Alex Armentrout and his group, you know, worked in the past. All I know is that they attended school board meetings. They, you know, they combed through the budget. They, you know, they were there so that the only people in the room were not the constituents asking for more money to be spent, but also for people to hold the line. it's not something that we set up. I just, you know,
Yeah.
it's a discussion
what-
item. I thought that
Yeah,
it
I mean,
would be
I
helpful
would-
to have feedback, and, you know, maybe offline, somebody might identify a couple residents and encourage them to, you know, to do something.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about how to get from here to there.
Again, it's just something to think about, and we don't have to, it's no, you know, it just, I thought it was a useful thing to think about, considering what we had heard a couple weeks ago.
I do think it would be helpful to maybe have that group come, whether it's, you know, twice a year or something. I mean, I thought it was great conversation, and I think, you know, having them come on a more consistent basis would probably be a good idea.
Yeah, I like that idea as well. The information I got out of that group of 3 people was excellent. They knew their stuff.
Yep.
They knew the details. They knew the process extremely well. And I was thankful that we had those 3 individuals as representatives of the.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I thought so too. I was disappointed in the media report because, you know, I'm the one that asked the questions that you guys all submitted, and they made it sound like I was the one that was challenging them all the time. But I guess that's the media. And, you know, and they even use the words that, you know, we argued, or, you know, so-and-so argued, but, you know, they toss that out instead of so-and-so stated or whatever. So it was too bad, because I thought we had a nice, you know, cooperative.
Yep, I agree. I thought it was a good conversation, and I think the more we build that and foster that, I think, you know, they will get used to coming and kind of reporting out, and that gives the community more understanding of what's happening within the school, which, you know, maybe some of them didn't have any of that information. So
yeah, and I think it just struck me that a couple of them actually said, you know, it's different. Again, paraphrasing, suggested that it's difficult for them as board members to hold the line, even if they want to hold the line, if they don't have anybody in the room encouraging them to hold the line. You know, it's true. It's like if we have just one side coming to us in select board meetings on something and that's it, it's difficult to, you know, to go the opposite direction.
My only comment on that is I've had a couple of people comment on it, one good, one bad. And the bad one, I was taken aback by, because it really surprised me, and I will not mention their name, but they questioned how we would even begin to question the school and how they give bonuses and raises, and is it really any of our business? And I'm going, obviously they caught that one bit of the meeting, but they missed the $2 million mark, you know? I mean,
Right.
We need to start asking those questions.
Right. And then people that, you know, people come to us and want to know why 68, you know, why their property taxes are so high. That's because 68% of it's going to the schools. So, you know, you need to make sure that the schools are accountable, and it's not to suggest that they're not, but somebody needs to make sure that, you know, that there's some accountability going on.
Bill, just as a follow-up, if I can, I know I had mentioned it at one of our other meetings. When might we expect, you know, this is what your property tax mill rate would be if it had been done correctly versus what it is now? I mean, is there any projected time that we might have that? Just, you know, because people might like to see those numbers and say, oh my God, you know.
I do have that. I do have that. I got it maybe a week ago, so I can send that out.
All right, good, thank you.
Denise.
I guess I'm just, and I think that's good, valuable information. I guess well, we'll talk more in the executive session, I guess, about issues related to that.
Discuss litigation.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, we have select board liaison reports. It's late. I don't know if anybody has anything burning that they want to report. Go ahead, Mark.
Parks meeting on the 11th via Zoom. If anybody wants to get involved or participate, get a hold of Diane and they can hook you up. And on the 12th, we have a conservation meeting. And again, it's by Zoom. And if anybody wants to participate, get hooked up. That's it.
I want to go on parks a little bit. So a big shout out to the Parks Committee. Memorial Park is starting to be put back together. Even today, there are wreaths up for Veterans Day on Wednesday, cleaned up the front memorial. So I think that's giving residents a little bit of heart to see the park start to be put back together. So great, lots of good volunteer work. At the last Parks Committee meeting, 2 motions were made, and I was asked to inform the select board of these motions. That the Parks Committee believes that the town should purchase and install 2 street lights for the bridge at $8,000 each, plus $2,000 for installation for public safety and beautification. So that was the first motion. And the second was that DPW construct a 4x4 pressure treated frame for community signage located south of Route 1 and 90. I think if anybody's paid attention to that intersection across from the market basket there, where we've got the nice sign for the town of Rockport, and then that area just gets inundated with signage. Much of it violates DOT sight lines. And a lot of those signs don't even go through the town to get the proper permission. Some do. But there's the thinking by the Parks Committee and the Beautification Committee is that you, across from Hannaford's is that sign structure that's built so that signs can all be posted, and that we would have something equivalent. And Mike Young is sort of ready and willing to do that if he's instructed to. And that would be just a little south of the intersection, and all the signage could go up there and clean up that sort of entrance to the sort of village area of Rockport, if you will.
We talked about that before, and wasn't there some issue that we couldn't require signs to be limited there, or?
I've looked at the sign at the ordinance. I don't think there's any, we would, as a courtesy, inform people like the YMCA and MRC that this is how we're going to do it, but we're offering them an appropriate location, and then we don't have the DOT sightline issues that actually create more of a hazard at that intersection. But I don't think the sign ordinance would in any way prohibit us from doing that.
We probably, when it comes to political signs and stuff, we can't, right? I mean, I think
I don't know what we do with those, so I think
that's
out
just
of that for now.
Yeah.
We might have a little bit of a window here where we don't have to worry about those kind of signs.
But I thought that there was something about, with the state easement stuff that maybe was a problem, but maybe not. Anyway, Jeff. Unmute. Can't you unmute yourself?
I can now. Thanks, Bill. Sorry. Every time I mute myself, it turns into semi-permanent until Bill unmutes me.
Be unmuted now.
From the Pathways Committee has an upcoming meeting. It'll be on the calendar by Zoom. The rest, I don't have any other further updates. The Harbor Committee, we just saw the results of the last meeting there.
And for me, Planning Board is meeting the 19th, and I don't have any other updates aside from that.
And ZBA is meeting Monday. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. The ZBA will have its sort of organizational meeting and training Monday at 6 o'clock via Zoom. Those just both got switched to Zoom, and then the hotel appeal meeting will be Tuesday night. Again at 6 p.m. I think the press reported that one at 5:30, but the schedule is 6.
The task force, the parking task force meeting was postponed today. The Midco solid waste, do we have anything? You were at the last meeting, Denise.
Yeah, we're going to
we're going to bi-monthly meetings. And then I guess the one thing that I wanted to mention was, the board had approved going with Mission Broadband along with Camden on this broadband proposal. We've gotten some other indications. I won't bore you with the long detail tonight, and I'll put this on as an agenda item at some point, but we've got some indications that it might be more efficient and productive for our money to go sort of a different direction, and to maybe get some other towns on board with us first. So basically the broadband Camden Rockport Broadband Task Force has unanimously agreed that we should just hit the pause button with respect to that contract. So unless anybody has any heartburn over that, then I will, I'll report on it more fully at a later time, but that's what the suggestion is. Okay. I think that's it, right? Nobody else has a liaison report. So would somebody like to make a motion to go into executive session? The first one? Executive.
Yeah, go ahead, Denise.
I move we convene an executive session pursuant to 1 MRS 4066E to discuss a legal matter.
Second.
Okay, roll call. Mark?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Denise?
Yes.
And I vote yes. As a matter of logistics, do we just stay on here, Bill, or do we?
Yeah, you can just stay on there. We're going to give it a minute because Evan is going to be logging in, and we've got to shut down the live stream. So,
yep.
Bruce, if you can shut down the live stream.
Right. Do we also need to do